Here we are. Here we are. It's getting like dark at like 4 now where I live. It's just like literally like 4 o'clock rolls around and it feels like it's 9 at night or like 10. Oh, so much for daylight savings time, eh? Well, the beautiful lights that you're seeing. So, quick update on my internet situation. So, a tech was in today, and they said everything was fine. That if the problem persists, there's two things that I can do. Thing number one, replace the modem. Right, things get old. Right, the modem might just be getting old. And the other thing is that I maybe upgrade how much I can upload. That he was thinking that because I'm thinking of doing 2 streams. Right now I'm not. I'm just doing the 1 stream. Stip Mapper, how you doing, bud? Wow. I don't know if I've ever seen you here, and you're the first comment today. Congratulations to you, friend. You've made it happen. Hope you're here to contribute in a beautiful way. Radio, good to see you, bud. And I think that's probably true, that if I just upgrade my internet like 1 step, I can get into a more stable position if I'm doing a dual stream. I'm going to do today just YouTube, see how that goes. And then tomorrow I'm going to try doing the dual stream again. And if it continues and it's smooth and everything's fine, then everything's fine. And I don't need to worry about it. But if the same problems start to appear, then I'll do something about that and try to just, because I want to do the double stream. Since I started streaming on TikTok as well, I mean, it's been a resounding success, so I think I've got to continue doing that. Stip Mapper goes and straight up asks the most basic question, right? What is good about communism? Communism at least attempts to solve problems. That's the bottom line. Like, you can critique whatever you'd like to critique, and you probably do, right? And it's fine. But at least communist nations are looking at problems and saying, that is a problem, we should try to solve it. Right? And they have a long history of looking at problems, poverty, right? Like homelessness, just really simple, straightforward shit that you can obviously see in your own society. And just say, no, that's a problem, we should probably try to solve it. And then they try to solve it. Like, that's it. For me, that's the bottom line. Like, capitalism does not give a shit about your problems. It doesn't care. And in fact, capitalism creates more problems than it solves. By a lot. By a lot. And the best capitalism will ever attempt to do is to sell you a product to alleviate the problem that capitalism itself is responsible for creating. Do I know who Joseph Broz Tito is? I know of Tito. I'm not an expert. So I know that there are lots of communist types who really venerate Tito and take a look at Tito. I don't, unfortunately, I don't know enough about him to comment. So, hey, Ligon Dizzy, how you doing, bud? Glad to see you. We're going to have a pretty calm stream today just because I am only streaming on YouTube here. My dog is getting caught up in the cords and it's going to cause a problem. I'm absolutely sure of it. Milo, get out of there, bud. Milo, what are you doing? Get out of there. Get out of there. What are you doing? He literally found like a little piece of food on the ground, and now he's just nomming it. Sweet little guy. Lots of Stip Mapper. Lots of people say this about Tito. So I just haven't had the time or the honestly, like, I just haven't really had the incentive to do so. So maybe this is the moment. Where I should start taking a look. I don't know. Like, right now we've got China run by the Communist Party, basically blowing everybody out of the water. And I don't like doing research on the stream, Step. Like, I don't like doing research on the stream. I don't think it's very interesting. The Communist Party of China is blowing everybody away right now, and like it's you don't need to look too far. Right? It's not that difficult. You can tell that the capitalists and the capitalist death cult is deathly afraid of it. because they keep trying to pretend like it's actually capitalism that did that, and oh goodness me, and all this kind of stuff. It's like, it's absolutely false. And the Chinese are making strong decisions, attempting to solve problems, right? Like they're being very, very successful. And it's through the terrifying idea that we should plan, right? We should actually make a planned economy. And they're actually interested and incentivized to root out corruption, and they're actually interested in, and whereas for us, like, I mean, it's on the screen right now. This is your reminder that Ghislaine Maxwell was found guilty 327 days ago of child trafficking, and not one predator that paid to be on an island with minors has had their name released, their home raided, or been arrested. Like, this is like the glaring reality of modern capitalism, that the system not only generates these pedophiles, but protects them. That we're all supposed to just forget about this situation because, oh well, like we actually managed to, yeah, Ghislaine is spending time in a mansion. Yeah, she's living in a place where she has servants. That's a true punishment for her. You know? And so, story over. No need to carry on, no need to continue. Like as if we're just supposed to ignore that people like Bill Gates, people like Donald Trump, people like Bill Clinton were on these flights, right? We're on these flights. Can I talk about the situation in China, the protests against lockdown? Yeah, I think that it's just being overblown. That's all. Like, it's normal for people. Like, first of all, it took forever, right? Like, we were going into protests here in the West, like, because we had to put a piece of cloth on our face, and it was happening instantly, right? Like, it's I think that it's normal for groups of people to come together and protest, and I just think, yeah, the protests are already over. The chances are really, really good that the political party there is responding to what the people are saying and are listening, because, like, I don't know, it's normal. It's normal for people to protest. It's a normal way for a society to interact with itself, right? And it seems to me as though the way the Chinese government has responded to it is completely reasonable and completely rational. They listened. They've tried to respond to the concerns, right? Like, compare that to something like what happened with the Freedom Convoy here in Canada, right? You can see very much that, like, we're not a very civilized people, right? We don't really respect the concept of protest. We don't really respect it. And yeah, China's going to have some protests. It's normal. And I think that they responded to it in a fine way. It's only your, like, real CIA dead brains that are walking around being like, protest in China, oh my god, what a terrible, oh my goodness. Like, it's normal. It's beyond normal. Now, if the Chinese government had gone in there and, I don't know, evoked something like the Emergencies Act and cleared them out through violent force and thrown a couple of people in prison without trial, you know, the way that we did, you know, then we would be talking differently. But that's only Western nations that act that way. I wish Yugoslavia would be back. Yeah, there's a reason why it's not. Yeah, the USA hates communism. Canada's their little dog. Yep. No, I mean, like, it's so funny because it's like we have forgotten here in the West that, like, the USA, it's not like they're secretive about it. Like, they're simultaneously, like, the mega crowd is all about these days, like, all about freedom of speech. That's all they can talk about. They'll come into my chat and the only thing they want to talk about is freedom of speech. You know, the freedom to be racist, the freedom to be a Nazi. This is the freedom that they're talking about. But they don't care about that at all, and it's obvious, right? Like, the United States has always been openly, explicitly anti-communist. Like, I mean, for God's sakes, the McCarthy period. Like, literally, the invasion of Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia was being done specifically under the pretense of staunching the flow of communism. Like, It's never been a secret, and yet we're supposed to take seriously when these basically far right libertarians that call themselves but fucking Nazis are walking around pretending like, oh, we gotta protect free speech. They don't give a shit. They don't give a shit about free speech, right? The McCarthy style purges that are coming our way are very, very obvious. Like, the first layer of it is algorithmically, right? Like that we are algorithmically being suppressed. That if you are a communist on these platforms, an algorithm will suppress you. That, like, my TikTok got suspended for a week. I see it, like, there's Midwestern Marks. There's one fellow on TikTok had 100,000 followers, and he had to restart a new account because they just killed it. They just destroyed it. And it's just like, and then these people walk around talking about free speech. It's embarrassing, right? It's embarrassing that free speech means the freedom to be a Nazi. That's what they're talking about. They don't care about the freedom of speech to say, like, hey, why are there homeless people? Maybe we should do something about this. Maybe we should have a serious discussion about why is there a society that's permitting homelessness. Because, you know, the fascists in our midst like to pretend like it's a personal... They're just like, oh, well, that's a them problem, and they should just go die through the medically assisted dying program that we have. Right? Yeah, look at Cuba. The USA was paranoid to the point they almost started a nuclear war. I mean, to be fair, like, Russia was putting nuclear bombs. Like, we shouldn't have nukes. We just shouldn't. I know, Milo. You got a little squeaky toy there. We just shouldn't have nukes. Like, we're not intelligent enough for that. We're not wise enough for that, right? Like, it's very clever of us. Congratulations, we did it. We made nuclear bombs, but we are going to blow ourselves up with them. Like, we're not smart, you know. And it, to me, it's only a matter of time until we get some just raving psycho in a position of power, and like it's all like we've already configured our society to be a death cult. So to me, it's just this idea, like, why do we even have these? Like, and it's so crazy to me that we did go through a period of time, a period of disarmament. It was actually Reagan, for God's sakes. It's Reagan that starts to decommission nuclear bombs and starts working with the rest of the world to actually prioritize and decommission nuclear bombs. But it's Bush, it's W, right? W starts building more nukes again. And it's just like history is going to look back on someone like George W. Bush, like, unless you really fall for CIA propaganda and get into the myth of it. But, like, George Bush was as bad as as Hitler, as any of these guys. Like, he's a raving lunatic. But he was walking around talking like this. I mean, like, hey, yeah, fool me once, shame on you. Fool me, I ain't gonna get fooled again. Right? And we were all just like, oh, what a dopey idiot. I'd love to go have a beer with him. Like, fucking genocidal maniac. Building nuclear bombs, invading countries, stealing their resources. Like, fucking... And the idea that he's presented to us as if he's just like this dopey idiot. I'm like, nah, that guy's like a foaming at the mouth lunatic. And we just sort of let him walk around. I don't understand it, but okay. The fall of the USA is imminent. States like Texas, another one, want independence. Yeah, the dollar's losing value. Yeah, I think that's right. I've been talking about that myself, Stip. Yeah, I think California, and you're right, there are other ones for sure. When the dollar collapses, that's going to be a big moment, and that's basically written in the stars now. I don't think there's any way to prevent that. That the only reason the United States has been getting away with this game that they've been playing is because they had dollar hegemony, and now you've got major powers in the world: Russia, China, India. Right? They're just not going to trade in the dollar anymore. Like they're not going to stop trading in the dollar, but they're not going to exclusively trade by the dollar any longer. And that's going to create, yep, BRICS, exactly. It's an economic alliance whose point is to deal massive damage to the US dollar. Yep, you're exactly right. And if the point isn't to deal massive damage to the US dollar. That's not actually the point of it. But the point of it is to say, like, look, why are we ceding all of this financial authority to this crazed group of obvious Nazis? Like, NATO is obviously a Nazi organization. Like, you don't need to look any farther than Libya or Yugoslavia, right, to see that this is obviously the case. Like, these people are crazy. Like, if they wanted to actually be reasonable and rational people, they could, but they're choosing to be psychos. They're choosing to be psychos. Like, obviously choosing to be psychos. And the rest of the world is looking at them being like, really? This is what we want to be in charge. A group of people who are so just, like, crazed and psychotic that they're protecting, like, pedophile sex islands while simultaneously, like, invading successful countries and destroying their people. Like, your dad says US and NATO is at fault for the collapse of Yugoslavia. Yeah, I mean, things will be better when the boomers die, dude. Like, I've been saying it for a while. Sorry if you're a boomer out there. Like, really, I apologize for this commentary, but it's just something that I think is unavoidable at this point. Like, when the boomers finally go and die, it's going to improve the society dramatically. Like, we're looking at a group of people who are not capable of grappling rationally with the world around them. And it's really time for us to accept that. That there is just, like, this okay boomer moment. That I'm just like, okay boomer, yeah, whatever you say, right? There's literally no reason to try to debate these people anymore, because I don't think they're capable. Like, straight up. Like, I think that, like, lead and CIA propaganda has made their brain incapable of understanding reality. Like, I think they live in a fantasy world. Like, many of these guys are literally like, well, I'm going to go see Jesus after I die, right? Like, they're still in this kind of mindset that, like, after we die, everything will be better because we're going to go hang out with Jesus. And you're just like, what a horrible worldview. Because then, like, like, this plane of reality literally doesn't matter to you. If you're walking around being like, yeah, I can't wait to die and go see Jesus, then you're just not going to bother attempting to struggle for any benefit whatsoever. And we are looking at a generation of people who have completely given up on the idea of helping their children. They just do not care about helping their children. It's just not of interest. Like, all the boomers want now is to die comfortably. That's all they're looking at. They want to go into a place where there's security, safety, where they can go to, like, a Tim Hortons or something, right? Read a newspaper or watch Fox News or whatever, right? And that's all they want. And they don't give a shit if doing that literally destroys the society. And as they're doing that, they're just disconnecting utterly from reality. Like, literally, you walk into these old folks' homes. I remember watching a report on this. Somebody walked into an old folks' home and was like, how much do you think a house costs right now? And people were saying, like, oh, a house is probably $50,000, right? Oh, yeah, a house right now, yeah, I bet $70,000 if it was expensive, right? Expensive house, probably $70,000. Right? These people are completely disconnected from reality. And it's just time for us to stop pretending otherwise. Like, they're and I think I know, Milo. What's about to happen here? I know. Look what you did. Look what you did, my man. I hate it when you do that. You know that? I hate it when you do that. When you put the little ball somewhere that you know you can't get, then you force me to come and get it. Little cartoon character. Like, we gotta stop pretending like that's not happening. Straight up. Like, we're literally facing this group of people who are, hey Compton, how you doing, bud? We're literally facing this group of people who are utterly disconnected from reality, like, in very obvious and tangible ways, but moreover, are completely disinterested in connecting with reality. Like, completely disinterested. Like, you could sit them down and try to explain it and try to be like, hey, reality exists. Here's what's reality, right? This is what's real. They're not going to learn. They're not interested in learning. They're literally disinterested in it at all. And all they can ever say and all they ever will say is just get a better job. That's literally all they're ever going to say. And so I say to people who find themselves in this state of despair or find themselves like shaking their head at the world around them and being like, oh my God, things are so terrible, right? Suicide rates are up. Everybody's losing their fucking mind. I just find myself saying, just give it a decade. Give it 10 years. The place is going to dramatically improve very swiftly because a group of delusional psychopaths are going to die. And that's going to make things better by default. Like, imagine living in a world where all of these, like, Jesus is coming at any moment. Just, they just become a kooky fringe cult again. And they literally don't have the ability to gain power anymore. Like, imagine what that world is going to look like. When, like, the Republican Party is literally looking at the evangelical death cults and being like, oh, you can't actually gain power for us anymore. So we got to stop paying attention to you and move on to something else, right? It's going to improve the society dramatically by default. Like, imagine trying to, like, a Republican is trying to get power in a region, but everybody there is like, what about climate change? And all of the people who are walking around being like, climate change, Chinese hoax, are just dead. They're just dead, right? Like, so the society is going to improve dramatically. So if you're one of those people out in the world thinking to yourself, man, I don't know about this, like, I feel so isolated, alone, and everything seems to be going to shit and all that. Well, there is something that's going to dramatically improve it. You just need to wait. Hey, Seraphim, how you doing? I take issue with the genocide label. The only sad thing I know with the USSR is their genocides and rights of abortion, no matter what reason. I mean, what genocide are you talking about? Are you talking about the Nazi propaganda surrounding the Holodomor? Is that what you're talking about? Like, literally, I've never seen a more obvious political tool, right? Like, it's so obviously the case that this Holodomor narrative is just political. Like, that's really it. Like, oh, the Holodomor was this massive genocide that happened that the Germans are just now acknowledging happened, right? Like, oh, just now as they're in a war with Ukraine. Oh, interesting, right? Like, it's when you take a look at the Holodomor narrative, like, I always say this again and again when it comes to these sorts of things. Who are the academics, right? Forget about the newspapers, right? Who are the academics who are actually arguing in favor of this existing? And the Holodomor, whenever you find an academic, whenever I have found an academic, like I've listened to speeches given by people who are like far right, pro-capitalist, anti-communist people, but they're also interested in being a credible academic and a credible intellectual. And they've gone into the Soviet archives and they've come out being like, yeah, they didn't intend it. That there was a famine, certainly. Nobody can deny that, right? There certainly was a famine. But the Soviets didn't do it on purpose. They didn't plan to do it. And not only that, when the famine started, the Soviets did everything they could to alleviate the famine. So this whole idea that the Soviets created a famine and then made the famine worse and then did it intentionally is literally Nazi propaganda. It's not even CIA propaganda. Like, it's straight up as propaganda that comes out of Goebbels, that comes out of sorry, I keep saying neo-Nazis, but the Nazi movement at the time, right? And it just keeps getting sent up and it keeps getting supported by who? Nazis. Right? And now we're in a position where there's this conflict going on between Russia and Ukraine, and it turns out that the Nazis want this narrative to take hold. And so they're really pushing on it, right? Now's the time. Now's the time. Kizk. Never seen you here before, bud. Hope you're here to interact in a beautiful way. Murder of Polish generals. Yeah, I don't know enough about it, dude. Like, sorry, bud. Like, my opinion of communism doesn't hinge on, like, 100 guys died once. Like, sorry. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I'm dealing with accusations of like famines that killed millions and millions of people. Like I'm not going to address every little tiny shitty thing, and chances are really, really good that if I do, I'm going to find out that yeah, some communists killed some Nazis. Like that's usually how this goes. That somebody stands up and says, "Oh, the communists did an evil thing to Nazis." And I'm always just like, "Yeah, bro. Like I don't give a shit. I really don't." Like, somebody was in here, like, last week trying to be like, in Estonia! I'm like, fucking Estonia, population 1 million people. Sorry, my opinion of communism doesn't hinge on what happens in Estonia. Like, really, it doesn't. Just some, like, backwards culture acting in a backwards way. Yeah, okay. I'm fucking not surprised. I'm with gritting guys, John. Your bar's too low. Gen Z, stop the red wave. To heck with the older ones. I mean, like, But it's got to, like, we can already see that the death cult is panicking, right? Like, take a look at what's going on with Kanye right now. Like, this Kanye story. I haven't really been commenting on it because I don't tend to pay that much attention to figures like this, but it's so clear that he's being used to normalize Nazism. Like, it's so clearly that's the case. To really draw a line in the sand and to really be like, hey, who is okay with Nazism, who is not okay with Nazism, right? And you can see, like, the guy does this tour, goes on all, like, Tim Dillon, Alex Jones, all this kind of stuff. And these guys are trying to, like, give him advice to distance himself from these Nazi positions, but, like, they're still platforming him, and they're still talking to him, and they're still putting him in front of people. And so what is Kanye doing there? Right? And what are they allowing Kanye to do? Recruit. That's what they're doing, right? They're giving Kanye the platform to be able to recruit Nazis into Nazi groups while they get to go, oh, well we're just, I'm not a Nazi myself. I'm just, good speech beats bad speech, And so they're so obviously drawing lines in the sand and using this as recruiting, basically. And like, the death cult's not going to go down quietly. Like, it's not going to be like, well, the vote went this way because Gen Z's got an opinion, so, like, that's not how it's going to work, right? Like, we got this great article here, comes out of Rainer Substack, by the name of Neoliberalism Won't End with Reforms. It will end with fascist crackdown, societal unraveling, and revolution. In 1980, when neoliberal austerity was beginning to be implemented, Bank of America CEO Tom Clausen issued a warning for his fellow members of the bourgeoisie. He concluded that when people are desperate, you have revolutions. It's in our own evident self-interest to see that they are not forced into that. You must keep the patient alive, because otherwise you can't effect the cure. This year, Bank of America's leadership articulated a different view towards how the capitalist class should relate to the workers. In a memo on which developments would be beneficial for the bank, an economics researcher tells the leaders that a modest further rise in the jobs participation rate should help push up the unemployment rate, but we think most of the increase will likely come from weaker demand for workers. By the end of next year, we hope the ratio of job openings to unemployed is down to the more normal highs of the last business cycle. This means Bank of America, and all the other big banks or corporations by extension, view worsened conditions for workers as the favorable outcome from a profits perspective. The memo is speaking to the pandemic's phenomenon of workers gaining leverage over employers, which can only be reversed by driving the workers into even worse circumstances. The bourgeoisie want the people to get more desperate than they already are, so that they'll accept an intensification of their own exploitation, which is consistent with the way both parties are treating workers. By signing a bill forcing a compromise for the rail workers, Biden has sabotaged their effort to fully gain their rights. Any Democratic partisan who tells you otherwise is lying. Until the labor movement gains enough power to either intimidate the state into going back on this decision or replace the current state with a workers' state, The workers will continue living in this coercive arrangement. We all know that the latter scenario of revolution is going to be the only one in which justice is possible. The ruling class will never again be willing to make the compromises that FDR made, and that Clausen said would need to be maintained in order to avoid an uprising. This is because, since Clausen made that statement, capitalism has been in a stage of decline that's too advanced for the class reconciliations of the past to ever again be viable. To keep up profits, the bourgeoisie need to wage a progressive and unending war against workers' rights. Otherwise, the socio-economic order will fall apart. The proletarian revolution will come anyway. So the bourgeoisie's best option is to continue driving up exploitation and hope revolution can be prevented despite the ever-growing contradictions this creates. The consequences, at least until our revolutionary institutions become strong enough, are an expansion of suffering that can't be stopped for the time being. As long as the dictatorship of capital exists, it can only keep tightening its grip, which has destructive effects on every level, from the stability of the climate, to international relations, to the mental health of those trapped in capital's coercive machine. This last month, a Starbucks barista said, "People wonder why we need a union at Starbucks. There's so many customers, and we have 4 people on the floor all day. Only 5 people were put on the schedule, and someone had to call out. We don't have fair scheduling. Our managers don't care about us. Our manager was supposed to come in the weekend and took himself off the schedule so he wouldn't have to be held accountable for calling out. We need a union because this can't happen. This can't happen because we need fair scheduling. We need managers to hold themselves accountable for helping their workers." This worker's impulsive rant to his camera went viral, and he was mocked because of how he said it while in tears. The sentiment behind those who laughed at him was that even though it's relatable to feel like crying because you've been hit with a combination of overwhelming things, in his case, being a student who now had to spread his barista work thin while multiple customers were regularly getting angry at him for something not his fault, you supposedly should keep your breakdowns to yourself. Implied in this is the idea, if you've ever been reduced to an unsound state of mind by what our society does to you, you have no hope of changing your circumstance, as you've shown vulnerability, and therefore aren't supposedly capable of becoming assertive. Yet my reaction to watching this is the kind of worker who has the potential to become the most dedicated kind of revolutionary militant. If you relate to the crying barista student, if you've ever been made to feel overwhelmed by our socioeconomic system, you have knowledge of what kind of thing we need to fight against. Our conditions are cold and cruel. They break you. But what happens after you've been broken? What does the ruling class expect after it's created a population that no longer has anything to lose by rising up? More and more workers like the barista are coming to class consciousness. They're going through a developmental process in which they initially make mistakes, such as wanting to take militant action without regard for the conditions. Yet this process can ultimately make them come to the conclusion to the Indian Marxist Bhagat Singh. Let me announce with all the strength at my command that I am not a terrorist, and I never was, except perhaps in the beginning of my revolutionary career. And I am convinced that we cannot gain anything through those methods. One can easily judge it from the history of the Hindustan Socialist Republican Association. All our activities were directed towards an aim, i.e. identifying ourselves with the great movement as a military wing. If anybody has misunderstood me, let him amend his ideas. I do not mean that bombs and pistols are useless, rather the contrary. But I mean to say that mere bomb throwing is not only useless, but sometimes harmful. The military department of the party should always keep ready all the war material it can command for an emergency. It's when one has reached that point of pragmatic class struggle in which they're willing to fight capital not just with militant passion, but also strategic patience and restraint, that they become a serious threat to capital. The dynamic that I've come to after years of developing as a Marxist is watchful waiting. Every other day I work out. All the time I work to help complete my cadre's set of necessary tactical equipment. Constantly I try to gather more theoretical knowledge. But I don't yet take action, not any more than what my party instructs me to do. I need to hold myself back until our revolutionary organizations get sufficiently built up and they become capable of challenging the state's authority. Every time I participate in party building and mass educational efforts, I do so with the knowledge that when my movement gets powerful enough, we'll provoke the state into imposing a brutal military crackdown. And I've accepted these consequences because I'm aware of the route towards outmaneuvering the state. This direction of neoliberalism is not towards reform. It's towards intensifying capitalism's contradictions until class tensions reemerge, utilizing fascism to try to put down the uprising, and then further losing control due to provoking the people through reactionary violence. The capitalist state is creating for itself the scenario that Che described in guerrilla warfare, a method. These dictatorships carry on with a certain legal framework. Milo, my man, my little boy, my beautiful little boy. I'm reading the works of Che Guevara here, the words of Che Guevara, and you're just squeaking your squeak toy. What a character. These dictatorships carry on within a certain legal framework, adjudicated by themselves to facilitate their work throughout the unrestricted period of their class domination. Yet we are passing through a stage in which pressure from the masses is very strong and is straining bourgeois legality so that its own authors must violate it in order to halt the impetus of the masses. Barefaced violation of all legislation or of laws specifically instituted to sanction ruling class deeds only increases the pressure from the people's forces. The oligarchical dictatorships then attempt to use the old legal order to alter constitutionality and further oppress the proletariat without a frontal clash. At this point, a contradiction arises. The people no longer support the old, and much less the new, coercive measures established by the dictatorship, and try to smash them. We should never forget the class character, authoritarian and restrictive, that typifies the bourgeois state. Che's words provide hope to the situation that the barista spoke to delay its collapse. Capital is paradoxically sacrificing the social stability it depends on. Starbucks is waging war against unionization attempts by closing down its locations, only able to maintain its abusive control over the workers who are the most vulnerable. Bank of America wants to increase the number of people who are in those desperate circumstances. It will work in the short term, yet in the longer term, it will fulfill Clausen's prophecy. Watson, good to see you, bud. Good to see you, bud. I actually look forward to... What are you talking about? Kanye's devolution into an open fascist has nothing to do with race. Yeah, it has everything to do with the breakdown of culture and capitalism in the U.S. Yeah, petty bourgeois nihilism and mental illness. Yeah. And the Trotsky essay, Bonapartism and Fascism, would go along with the Guevara quote, for sure. And I think your assessment of, like... I do think that Kanye is just straight up mentally ill. Like, straight up. Like, I think that the guy is simultaneously going through, like, a divorce, losing lots of money. Like, he's just collapsing. And it just seems like he's trying to find the fastest way to burn his legacy down. You know? Just destroy it all. Seems to be what he's up to. Seems to be what he's up to. When the gulags were dismantled, hold on, Kanye is progress because now now people of color can be Nazis. Yeah, trans rainbow cruise missiles, Slava Raytheon, exactly, dude. Yeah, exactly. Like, just like whatever. Like, you know, we don't need you don't need to be white to be a Nazi now. Yeah. When the gulags were dismantled, there was tens of thousands at most that were released. A far cry from millions. Yeah, absolutely, dude. Like. What's interesting is that once the liberals dismantled the USSR, there wasn't any leaders in the USSR that was tried and punished. Yeah, like Nazi commanders, because there was no evidence for crimes. Yeah. These anti-communists would have paraded their evidence through the Moscow if they had it. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Like, if they actually had the evidence, it's the only thing that they would ever talk about. Right? Like, but they don't, because no such evidence exists. And that's always the case. Yeah, gulags had a normal life expectancy, except during World War II. American prisons kill people like 10 years early. Yeah. Sure, the issue is that the claims of millions imprisoned and millions killed, it's surprising that the counter-revolutionary leaders that dissolved the USSR couldn't find any concrete evidence. Yeah, since when have these people cared about evidence? Since when is evidence ever something they give a shit about? Like, I mean, just take a look at the claim of 100 million people dead in China under Mao. Like, there's literally not a scrap of evidence for it. Like straight up, nothing. And we're supposed to take this seriously? We're supposed to listen to these people? But, you know, if you just spend $100 billion and give them the largest mouthpiece, then that's because the communists in the USSR at its capitulation to capitalism, yeah, we're lining up to be capitalist enablers. Yeah, that's absolutely the case, Watson, for sure. Like, if I wanted to be really nice to those guys, like if I the narrative that I've kind of begun thinking about that group of people, your Yeltsins and Khrushchevs and all these guys, is like it is somewhat in their interests to attempt to integrate themselves into the European systems, right? That I can see how it would be appealing to them to think, oh, like, who are the people who are constantly going to war with us historically? Who are the people who are trying to cause us the most problem? It's these fucking Europeans. Well, now they've built, like, NATO, right? And it exists exclusively to dismantle the Soviet Union. And so rather than moving to direct confrontation and war, why don't we attempt to integrate ourselves with those systems? And I can see how, like, they would try to create that kind of thinking, but it obviously fails. Like, it obviously fails for the most unfortunate of reasons, right? The inevitable liquidation of the USSR was set in motion long before Khrushchev. Yeah, I mean, but I understand that, Watson. I'm just trying to create like Stalin is obviously a spent force at the end of his life, right? Like, he's not trying to create new projects, build new institutions, not really trying to pass a baton forward, right? Like, the most accurate critique I think you can say of Stalin, and I think he himself would probably agree with it, is that after World War II, the guy is basically just like, okay, we just need to rebuild this place and try to live something of a stable life, and there is no new fresh energy that comes out of the systems that are like, we need to continue the project of communism, and how do we continue doing this? Like, I think Stalin becomes something of a spent force, and the leadership of the Soviet Union ceases to think in ideological terms, and certainly Marxian terms, and starts to think in like nationalist terms. Like, I think that's probably the best way of saying it. Just like, what's good for the future of Russia. And I could see how they would say, like, getting involved with NATO, getting involved with the integration of the European Union and all of that is going to be good for Russia, right? Obviously, it didn't work out that way, obviously, but I can see why they would think so, right? Especially, like, China at that time is not the power it is now, right? And so Russia's basically sitting there being like, well, we can try to go it alone and just be like an isolated group, or we can attempt to integrate with the international systems. And to do that, we have to... I know, buddy, I know. My dog is like losing his little mind right now, guys. It's because I'm talking, and he's just like, oh, you're talking. Well, I'm the only one in the room, and you must be talking to me. right? Oh, John, you're talking and you're saying words so forcefully. It must be all for me. The only reason anybody would be talking would be to talk to Milo. Isn't that right, Milo? Yes, that's right, you cute little guy. Cute little guy. Millions of U.S. millennials moved in with their parents this year. Like, I don't think I'm ever going to understand the people who are still consistently attempting to defend, this obvious failed system. Like, we are reverting back into feudalism. Like, that's what we are reverting back into. And what this is doing is it means that if you're a boomer or a Gen X type and you have a house and you've got kids, right? Well, a lot of those kids are just going to move right back in with you. And what will happen is it's going to create a system of generational wealth. That wealth is going to pass down generation by generation. Like, that house doesn't just get sold to somebody out in the world. That house gets passed down to the younger generation. And so you're going to have a bunch of millennials who basically inherit houses, right? They're just going to inherit land, and they're just going to inherit this kind of stuff, and they're just going to end up with it. And the people who don't have that kind of situation, they're just going to die poor, right? That's all it is. They're just going to die poor and homeless and separated from the system. Because as they get older, like, you've got like 60% of the society living paycheck to paycheck, right? And as people get older, they cease to be able to work because they're too old to do so. And the system is not designed in any meaningful way to protect those people. And the people who are coming into power, more and more, are doing everything they can to ensure that the last 20 years of life are desperately bad. And now, and the solution that's coming out of capitalism, for all of this is the medically assisted dying system. Just like, oh, you can't work anymore, so you're going to be homeless and it's going to cause you problems. Well, here's a doctor who will put a needle in your arm and it'll all be over. That's the solution that they're going to use, and that they are using. I shouldn't even say gonna. Like, they are using that as the solution to this problem. And it's like, we are dramatically moving forward in a way that is amazingly obvious to just a straight up return to feudal structures. And we don't seem to even be interested in preventing it. Like, that's the part that kills me the most about this conversation. Like, we're not even interested in preventing it. Like, it seems like we've all just shrugged and accepted that that's the case, and we're just going to do it. Like, pretty incredible. Pretty incredible, in fact. More than 500 labor historians condemn Biden's intervention in freight rail dispute. Yeah, no shit. No shit. Like, you want to see the move of our society into this feudal state. Like, literally, the president of the United States is ordering people to go back to work because the job is so important that they must do it. But the job doesn't pay enough to actually give people a good quality of life, right? Like, this is what's so embarrassing about this conversation, is that you're saying that the job should be done and needs to be done, and it's desperately important that it does happen, but we're not going to compensate people. And like, it's gotten so pathetic. It's not like the rail workers are asking for like a huge increase in pay or something. It's not like they're literally asking for like a handful of sick days. It's literally what's on the table. That they're saying, like, yeah, we'd just like some sick days, but we can give infinite money to the Ukraine war, right? Like, the Biden administration is spending like $200 million a day on the Ukraine war at this point. And yeah, it looks like the DSA pseudo-leftists showed their true colors on the rail worker injunction. Oh yeah, like, this is what I've been saying about, you're talking about like the squad, right? Like, these people. Like, I've been saying it the whole time. Like, they don't care. Like, the AOCs and all this kind of stuff, like them being leftists is just their brand. Like, I wonder when people are actually going to figure that out about these guys. Is that when they stand up and talk about rights and justice and truth and all that kind of stuff, they are just looking at what actual leftists say and then repeating it back to them in order to get votes. But they don't believe any of that. They don't fight along those lines. They don't care. They know who they work for. They understand who they work for, and they're going to do everything they can to continue funneling money into the hands of their owners. And that it's just showmanship. It's not different than when Hulk Hogan stands up and says, "Oh, Hulkamaniacs, we're going to go fight the forces of darkness." And like, he doesn't care about any of that. It's not real, but it just appeals to you. That's all it is. That's all these people are. Like, they don't actually care about any of these reforms. Milo, my man. The squeaky toy dude. Do I got to take it away from you? I think I might have to. I heard the British Army has people who stand by to fill in for workers who may strike. Well, what's happening in the UK is actually psychotic. That they're literally passing legislation now making it illegal to protest. That, like, if you go and the way the legislation works, that it's not even if you currently go and protest or plan a protest. It's if you have ever been at a protest over the last 5 years, they can flag you and arrest you. Like, what's happening in the UK is psychotic, like openly fascist, like there's no reason to call it anything else. Like, they're criminalizing protest retroactively. Like, it's absolutely insane. And so, like, what you watch what happens in the UK if people actually do try to go on strike and do try to do that stuff. Like, that place is descending into open fascism. Like, very obvious. Like, for real, their prime minister is straight up a Goldman Sachs executive. Like, what do you think is happening? No, Sunak's not a spent force. He has lots of ideas. His ideas are, let's do fascism. Like, that's Sunak. Like, I really gotta, like, they know exactly what they're doing. They understand what they're doing, right? They know that what they're doing is ushering in an era of fascism. They're aware of it. That those are their ideas, and they are not a spent force. Like, they're not a spent force. They're gonna do that very effectively. By executive order, Biden could have taken away the Obama exception for railroads, which would have mandated 7 days of sick pay leave. Congress wouldn't have even been involved. Yeah, but we know who these guys work for, right? Yeah, the military will scab any union strike. The place V for Vendetta was set in and gave us the Guy Fawkes mask. Yeah. I mean, like, I think a big wake-up moment for lots of people is the realization that, like, World War II was actually, with the exception of the Eastern Front, was a conflict between fascist nations, right? That they, like, literally, like, that the major difference between America and Germany in that moment was essentially funny clothes. Like, and we're going to pay those consequences pretty dearly for allowing our leadership, or for continuing to allow the leadership of the country to be ruled by essentially fascists. Like, the shit that's coming for this nation, man. That's why I'm getting kind of detached from it. Honestly, like, I just see it as very silly what we are and what we do. Like, when I was younger, I was much more angry about it and much more angsty about it. But now I'm like, I'm going to be 40 soon. Literally next month I turn 40. And I'm just kind of looking at it. And I'm just being like, wow. Like, for all of our proclamations of our greatness and for all of our proclamations of how amazing and powerful we are, we're just scared monkeys with guns. And we're not really capable or competent, right? Or interested in being capable or competent. Like, we really are just like, yes, Daddy Elon. That's who we are. And it's really pathetic and sad. Like, we could make a world that is good. That the world could be interesting, full of leisure. We could be like having sex with one another like crazy. We could be living in a world that's just like full of play and enjoyment, where everyone's needs are well taken care of and everything is just completely hunky-dory. And we're just deciding not to so that 500 sociopathic vampires can have sex with little girls. Like, that's literally what we've done. And it's crazy to me that anybody is walking around talking about how capitalism is good in the midst of this obvious catastrophe that we're completely embarked on. There's a lot of articles about Sunak being a kind of lame duck. Yeah, of course there are a lot of articles about Sunak being a kind of lame duck. Yes, I'm sure that the corporate media is desperately working to convince you that the most fascist leader that Britain has likely ever had is just some lame duck that you don't need to worry about. I'm sure that they're working really, really hard while they round up protesters, while they break strikes, while they do everything they can to spread misery and poverty through their society, to reinforce the system of capital and to enforce it on people so that competing hierarchies will never appear. While they round up communists and smash people's heads in. I'm absolutely sure that the media that people like Sunak own are just trying to convince you that, oh, I'm just a lame duck, weak guy. Absolutely, I'm dead positive that that's the case. Thank you, Radio. Happy early birthday. Thank you, sir. You're really riled up, eh, buddy? I was deconverting from Christianity at 40-year-old. It's a time of waking up for many of us. Yeah, I mean, I'm just to a point now where, like, I don't have... Like, I'm not really attached to anything, you know? Like, I start to think to myself, like, so many people are just committing suicide, and so many people are just like, well, there's the golden door, I'm just going to step through it. There's nothing here, right? And I really do think to myself, like, why stick around? Like, what is here, actually? Like, for real. Besides just, like, waking up, going to a job that you hate, coming home and like watching media that's just getting more and more idiotic as time goes on, like really, like it's not even fun anymore. The stuff that's getting produced, it's just pathetic, most of it, and so you just waste your time kind of being grumpy, bullshitting yourself. Like, why? And even if you're like a creative type, like, what are you putting into the world? Like, who even gives a shit about this place? And the only thing that keeps me going is just straight up curiosity. Like, I am curious to see what this place is going to look like without the boomers in it. Like, I am very curious to see what a world where the oldest people are the millennials. Like, are we actually going to respond rationally to anything? Is that possible? That the systems around us are going to respond rationally? But we're going to have to go through this period of overt, like, the boomers are taking a shit on their way out the door. That's obviously what all this is. It's just that these whinging, whining bootlickers who had everything handed to them and refuse to give a shit at all about even their own children are basically just taking a shit on the floor while walking out the door. But they will walk out the door. Right? And then we'll clean up their shit, and will the place be better? I'm curious to see. But it's not going to happen without some kind of a fight, right? It's not going to happen without some kind of a fight. Yeah, it might be good after the collapse in a long dark period. I mean, that's exactly what I'm saying, CR Strifey. Like, it just seems to me like the question that we need to actually be asking ourselves is how do we prevent another generation like this? How do we prevent a generation of people who siphon up all the resources and then turn around and just literally do not give a shit about anything else. Like that to me is the worst part. Like the siphoning up of the resources is one thing, but it's this insistence. It's this utter insistence that people should just wallow in suffering and angst while we hoard all of these resources that would alleviate a lot of that. Like that to me is the core of it. And like you're gonna have a lot of these people, they're just gonna die with huge sums of wealth. Like, and they're just gonna have done nothing with it. Their life will be as pathetic as it possibly can be, and they'll just die holding on to all this money, just because they wanted it. Like that's the question that we really need to be asking. Like, how do we stop this from happening again? Because it's obviously catastrophic. Like, it's obviously catastrophic to have a generation of delusional, like, demented people with the most amount of wealth in the society. Like, it's obviously detrimental. We're in the heart of empire. I don't have much hope for the West in my lifetime. I think the best option is to organize, build power, prepare for collapse. Yeah. Prefiguration and mutual aid seem to be the best praxis at the moment. Yeah, that does seem to be the case. Like, get to know your neighbors, get to know people, create plans. Because, like, I mean, here in Ontario, the Ford government is privatizing everything. And it's going to take us decades to recover from the Ford administration. Like, if and that's even if a government comes in and is interested in recovering, which there's no guarantee that that's going to be the case. Like, the NDP just announced their new leader, and it's just some lame duck backbencher that nobody knows or cares about, right? There's no energy there. There's no anything going on. And I say it all the time. Like, the electoral system is not designed to ameliorate these issues. It's not designed to respond rationally to the public. That it's designed to keep power in the hands of the powerful. That's what it's designed for. And I do think that the West is already well into something similar to what happened in China, the 100 years of humiliation. Like, we're well along that path already. There's already like almost 1 million homeless people in America. There's already a widespread opioid epidemic. There's already like major crises that are happening. And I do think that there are states that are attempting to resolve that. I think that there are some states that are looking at it and being like, oh, how can we deal with this on a state level? I do think that does happen. But for every one state that's trying to do that, there's 5 that aren't and are going the exact opposite direction. So it's very difficult for me to believe that the United States maintains itself. Like, I just don't think that can be a fairly serious position. Like, how do they unify? How do they stay unified with one another? Especially when you have this like upswell of anti-wokeism, which is essentially just classic American racism on the upswell, right? You listen to DeSantis' speeches when he's saying the word woke, just replace the word woke with the word black, and you're there. Like, you're there. For instance, there have been several public tragedies in my area, car accidents, house burning down. Yeah, if there was a group that could send a large donation in the name of the Butler County Anarchist Association, it would make a difference politically and materially. Yeah. Like, we need projects of unification. Like, we need unifying projects. Nations require constant upkeep. Societies require constant upkeep. And the best upkeep that exists is some kind of unifying project. Something that we all do, we all come together, we all work to build, or we all engage in regularly, right? Like, we don't have that. It doesn't exist. And the traditional things that still technically exist, like churches, right? Because church is actually a really good community building, unifying project, right? We all come together, we all have a conversation, we air out difficulties or disagreements or show solidarity or support somehow to one another, right? But the churches have devolved into kind of a madness, frankly, and are really no longer interested in facilitating that any longer in a serious way. Carl Zah just did a breakdown of the Century of Humiliation in the new act list recently. If you're interested, that's good tip. I might take a look at that. Yeah, but offering mutual aid requires some form of income. Not necessarily. Like, you can volunteer time, you can put in labor, you can do stuff. It's exactly the type of thing we don't have, right? Like the system of capital is stripping us of time and resources, because it's a project of extraction and abandonment. And so it's easier said than done to build systems of mutual aid. And will people be able, like, people can have like a fleeting moment of like, yeah, that's a good thing to do, let's do that. But it requires a lot of upkeep, and it requires a lot of commitment, and it requires a dedication to actually do that I think most people don't have these days. Like, I think that we really are going to just, like, I take a look at the political apathy that's happening. Even like, you look at somebody like Doug Ford, and unless you are one of these detached boomer types, like, it's very difficult to go along with any of this. But there's no political force that's even coming up that acts as a counterbalance. Right? It just seems as though the population has kind of just shrugged and been like, this is what it is. This is what we're doing, and we're just going to continue doing it. And there's just not even an interest to have a political counterbalance. There's no energy there, right? There's no energy there. That what these sorts of things do need is like a political energy and a political movement. It just doesn't seem to exist. Key says, truly, I do not have a problem with churches themselves, but at least in Poland, and not only here, most churches are just filled with pedophiles and worse people. I don't have a problem with churches themselves, except all the pedophiles. Thanks, Key. Really nailing it for me. Yeah. The church structure under capitalism is completely fraudulent. Like, it literally cannot act in the interests of the people. And the only religious leaders who I would respect are the ones who would be taking their congregations into the streets in protest. That's the only ones that I would respect. But we've seen what the death cult does to those types of people, so there's a reason why they don't, right? Like, we know that the death cult assassinated Malcolm X and Martin Luther King and Fred Hampton. Like, we know. It sounds really, really obvious. Like, and so if you're, like a middle class, like you're a clergy person, right? You're living a middle class existence. You're part of this church. You're doing this kind of thing, right? I can understand why you would just kind of shrug and just be like, always remember that Jesus said this, and just go along with your life that way, and try to deal with, the problems of your congregation as you see them, and put on some pageants every so often or whatever. But you're disincentivized to actually do anything meaningful, right? Because the authority of the state has said that if you're successful at it, we will assassinate you, right? And you've got to be kind of dim-witted to think that that's not on the table. Grinning, I dream of a structure that could support hundreds of families outside the capitalist system. Food, clothing, shelter, housing, education, medical care, relationships. Yeah, like, the system of capital has done everything it can to make sure that can't happen, right? Because what do you need to make that happen? First and foremost, you need land, right? You need land. Well, what are we in the middle of right now? We're in the middle of a massive housing crisis, right? And it's because the capitalist death cult has bought up all the land and is hoarding it and refusing to share it, right? So if you even wanted to get anything started like this, like a commune, right? Well, you need the land. You're not going to get that. It's not going to happen. So it's like, they've got you by the balls. It's real straightforward. Go get it, buddy. Go get it. Sorry about Milo making a lot of racket, guys. He's in a very, very playful mood all of a sudden. We had a really, really chill day, and then all of a sudden I'm talking, and he's like, oh, that must mean we're playing. I think people have been made too busy under capitalism like life can be so tiring that doing mutual aid is too difficult. Yeah, I think that that's part of it. That's definitely part of it. And I think, honestly, I think it's bled into every aspect of our lives at this point. Like, one of the big things that I see around all the time is like why men and women are struggling to get into relationships with one another, right? And you do have like people on the right, like there's this new figure, what's her name? Pearl is her name, I think, who is very anti-feminist in the way that she talks, and she keeps presenting herself as a rational voice and all this, but it's basically like classic just be a housewife kind of shit. And but no one is coming out and saying at all ever that like, yeah, of course men and women are struggling to get together and have relationships. We're all fucking exhausted. We're all completely fucking exhausted and completely destroyed by this system of capital 100% of the time. And you essentially just have two types of people in the society right now when it comes to relationship and connecting to each other with relationships. You've got the vast majority, which are just being absolutely pilloried by this system of capital. And not only do they not have the time, but they don't have the money to actually like go have a date or any of that shit. And then you have the other group of people who are the doctor, lawyer, engineers types. And these people are just pretentious assholes for the most part, who look at people who work in service, for example, as just we would never date that person. That's like slumming, right? So they've cut out from their experience the idea that we're even going to engage with most of the population, right? So when you have a society that's like this, it's no small wonder that we're in this like population decline. It's no small wonder. Nobody's got time for any of this shit. It's like really, really basic human shit. Like, can you imagine talking to like your ancestor who literally lives in a grass hut and describing your society to them? And then them being like, so you must get laid a lot, right? Like you must be like a fairly open sexual society. And you'd be like, no, we're hyper repressed. No one ever has sex. Everyone's having a miserable time. And their response would be like, then why did you do any of it? What's the point of any of this? Like, if the point of all of this is not to make it so that it's easy for people to get together and have sexual relations with one another, then it's a failure from the outset. And you literally don't need to create any other argument. Oh my god, Milo. Like, if your society cannot actually have children, it's a failure. Go get it, buddy. Right? Like, is there even an attempt to dispute that this is just factually the truth? Like, if your society cannot have children, and if your society is not having children, then it's obviously a failure. Like, and I don't think you need to create any other argument. Oh, it's gone, buddy. It's gone. Where'd it go? This guy. We have Central and South America to have our children for us. I mean, that seems to be the case, right? Like, look, it just seems like I cannot get over how backwards we are. Like, that's the thing that really kills me. Like, when I was growing up, I grew up in evangelical Christianity, and their view of sex was like wrong on a level that I cannot even describe how wrong it is. Like, and I'm seeing it even today on like social media. You'll literally have like people arguing and saying that like, well, masturbation is a sin. It's a type of witchcraft. Like, this is something that literally went around. It's like a woman trying to convince everybody that masturbation is a form of witchcraft. Like, literally imagine believing that God created you, and that you have within the structure of your of you as an individual, you actually have built-in pleasure centers that you can interact with to have pleasure in your life, but if you do, then you're evil. Right? Like, this is the type of backwards, asinine bullshit that seems to exist within the consciousness of the West. That we literally despise our own bodies. We despise our own bodies, and we're ashamed of our own existences, while simultaneously believing that our existences are predicated on the creation by some kind of a God force. It's insane. Like, we are a backwards people. And everything we believe is inverted. Everything we believe is wrong. And it is going to get, like, extremely obvious that is the case. And we are going to have... I'm already seeing it. Like this Ronnie McNutt shit that happened last week. Right? I don't know if you guys were here for all this crazy shit. Right? This Ronnie McNutt guy commits suicide, and then I get, like, this huge influx of people doing all these memes and doing all this kind of stuff. It's just a descent into total absurdism. Right? A descent into complete and total madness. Yeah. No. What is your Aisley Noverture? Don't think I've ever seen you here. I hope you're here to participate in a beautiful way. Who can afford the cost of a date or children these days, sadly? Yeah. And, like, literally every person I know who has children is, like, exhausted. Both them and their spouse are working full-time jobs. Like, they've got to put their entire existence and their entire soul into this idea that kids should exist. And like I'm literally looking at people who are like, one person works like a government job full time, the other person works as a teacher. They do have a house and 2 kids, but they're fucking exhausted all the time. Or, like, you got, like, a lawyer and a professor, and they've got 2 kids, and they can't afford a house in the city that they work in anymore, right? Like, this is what's happening to even the people who are making all the right choices, right? That if you, quote-unquote, make all the right choices, you still are getting completely fucked. Like, I know another couple that's like a librarian and a professor's assistant, literally moving in with their parents, like literally moving into their parents' house, and it's just like this. What is any of this except an obvious, overt, complete and total failure? And if you stand up and say, "Oh, hey, there are solutions." There is a way that we can organize our society so that it's not so fucking stupid, so that it's not backwards, so that it isn't inverted, right? And if you just point out easy things, like, hey, how about instead of having food banks, which cost money and time and effort, we actually listen to what the people working at the food bank say and implement that solution that the people who are working at the food bank are saying we should implement, which is a basic income. That the Canadian food banks have been saying for a decade now. We should have a basic income. We should eliminate the food bank system. Why in one of the wealthiest countries in the world are there food banks at all? But if you stand up and say that, and say we should do something like that as per the recommendation of the fucking people who are doing the job, well, then you're a fucking communist, and communism always fails, don't you know? Like, we are very stupid. We are a very dim-witted, unintelligent, backwards people. Incapable of understanding basic reason. Like, 1 + 1 = 2. We're not there. We're not there. It's like 1 + 1 = wait a minute, that's communism, stop. Like, that's where we are. And we are facing a complete catastrophe over it. At one in which the questions we are going to have to ask ourselves as a people are, how did we allow, like, rogue terrorist organizations like the CIA to overwhelm our society so obviously? How did we allow an entire generation of people to become psychopaths and just take all the money and disconnect from the society. How did we allow this to happen? And how do we prevent it from happening again? And there are people who have written on this, but you've got to actually accept that maybe communists are worth listening to. Grinning says, I clean houses for a lot of clients. A good portion of them have post-education aged kids living at home, yeah? Or they let their kids' families move back in. It's very sad. They hate to talk about it, though, of course. Like, there's shame surrounding it, right? Like, we are a very shameful society. Like, and I don't mean, like, shameful as, like, a pejorative. I mean that we are full of shame. And the fact that all of these kids are moving back in with their parents is a complete and total repudiation of the myth of the greatness of the Western project, that we're the greatest countries in the world and we have manifest destiny and everything's so much better, that our invasions throughout the Middle East, Africa, and South America are all warranted because they're becoming more like us, right? That the world is better if everybody just becomes more like us. It's always been the justification for why going in and destroying these places are fine, because they're better off with us at the helm, right? But it's children moving back in with parents is a complete repudiation of that it's just hard evidence that shows that you are fucking wrong, that your system is a failure, it is not working, nor will it work. And while simultaneously the solutions to the problems are completely demonized as oh well, it's communism, you can never make that work, even though it obviously does. Yeah, hint, they never ask, they have full-time jobs, why do they have to move back in? You lost a client over that one, yeah. No, that's just it. Like because you are dealing, like you're hitting them right in the at the base, right? Like you're hitting them right. Just the even asking of the question, right? Like because everything is so hyper individualized, right? That people can't even think in terms of systems. They don't have a systematic understanding of what's going on. And so even asking the question, the only answer they can imagine to be true is that we failed. That's the only answer they can imagine to be true. And so you asking the question has in it an assumption of an insult that they will never hear. Look, these people have full-time jobs. Why do they have to move back in? Like, there's obviously a problem. We should find a solution for it. Right? They're never going to think that way. They are always going to assume that what you mean is they have full-time jobs. Why do they have to move back in? You must be a failure as a parent and they must be a failure as a citizen. Because everything has been so hyper-individualized that the citizenry can't even imagine anything else. Like that's where we are. And I find that to be the core reason for why everything is as dangerous as it is today. That we literally have an enormous segment of the population genuinely arguing that there is no such thing as systems. There's no such thing as society. There's no such thing as institution. There is only individuals negotiating with one another, which is so obviously false and so easy to falsify that it's embarrassing that it is a major talking point that exists at all. But when you have multi-billion-dollar institutions systemically spewing these lies into the society, it works because we're not that smart. Like, we're not as intelligent as we like to think we are. That's why I always end up with people, like when I do the TikTok stream, right? What always happens? I always end up with people coming in here, dick swaggering out, think they know something about the subject when they're the most illiterate people you've ever met, right? Like, have you ever noticed this about people? That the stupider and more illiterate they are, the more confident they become. That the less you know, the more confident you are that you are right. And it just seems unbelievable to me that that exists within the, and it seems to be universal. It just seems to be a universal truth. That because I think that if you're dumb or uneducated or illiterate, then all you actually have is your bravado, right? All you actually have is this front to put up. That's so easy to dismantle. But they don't genuinely care. Yeah, I like the TikTok crowd too, actually. Keeps things high energy. I'm hoping that tomorrow, I'm going to do it again tomorrow's stream. I wanted to do today's stream to make sure, right now there's no TikTok going on right now. That's why things are a little bit calmer right now. Although, a couple of new people in here today, which I'm happy to see. But I really wanted to just do this, just to be like, okay, is this going to work? Like, that's all I care about right now. Like, am I going to be able to stream YouTube and have YouTube actually work? So far, so good. I think we can say it's worked. Success. So the next step is tomorrow I'm going to try to do a live stream on TikTok. And if that doesn't work, then I have a couple of options. So option one, I had a tech in, and option one is to get my modem replaced. I don't think I need to do that because I think that this is working. But he also pointed out that I have a limit on how much upload I can do at one time, and that doing 2 streams at once might be going over that limit, and that might be what's happening, that it's just overwhelming the system that way. And so that means that I would have to just up my limit, which means spending more, but hey, what the hell, right? But it's probably going to be like $5 extra. So it's like, yeah, okay. And that's the because I do want to get like I like that. Like, I like these TikTok guys. Like, I think the TikTok chat itself is a fucking nightmare. Like, I think it's a total nightmare. But and I never want to interact with a chat where it's just flowing with just garbage, you know. So I'm happy with what I'm doing in terms of YouTube for the chat, and also the experiment of driving people from TikTok to YouTube was a total success, So I think that method is how I'm going to maintain sanity during this process. But given that YouTube has obviously deprioritized me on their algorithms, that literally you have to actually search "Capitalism is a death cult" word for word, no spelling errors whatsoever, or my videos do not come up. And so they've obviously deprioritized me in the algorithm. I'm obviously at the bottom. Like, they don't want to just ban me because that has repercussions. But they've certainly, like, so I've got to do something to actually drive traffic, and I think connecting to TikTok is a way to do it. But my TikTok account was suspended for 5 days, right? So clearly what's happening on that end is a bunch of people are a bunch of Nazis basically are just mass reporting me, and my account is just getting suspended, right? So it's like there's like this system that we live under, where we have ceded our communications network to private forces, is absolutely going to result in an overt totalitarian tyranny, in an obvious way, where the algorithms are being trained to be Nazis and are absolutely going to go through and purge anyone who even stands up and says just normal shit. If you just like stand up and say, why are there homeless people? Like, you will just be purged from the algorithm. And the only things that these algorithms will let through politically will be the people who get the little verified check mark or whatever. So your Petersons, right? Your Andrew Tates, like all these guys will dominate these platforms. because they're the ones who the billionaire class look at and go, that's what I want people to think. Why would you want something like free speech? Like, what are you talking about? And the best part about it is they'll do all of that. They'll purge all these people out while calling themselves great free speech defenders. That's exactly what they're going to do. And so it's only a matter of time until, like, I'm gone. It's quite straightforwardly, like, only a matter of time until I'm gone. Another good reason to get into the Discord, right? Because I'm not going to stop doing this. I'll just have to change my methods. Broccoli Cheddar Rice, good to see you, bud. This is the theme of the day, Jonathan. Been thinking a lot about how confidently people can express views they literally know nothing about, but the platitudes they heard somewhere along the way. Oh, yeah. Well, I think a lot of it comes down to just, like, I just want to be on the side of the majority, right? Like, it's not that much different from, like, from Survivor, right? That you're just going along with what you think the majority is doing so that you don't get targeted. Like, that's straight up what people do. That they don't actually care about what about this. They just care that the majority of people think this way. And obviously the majority of people must think this way, right? I keep seeing it every day on the news. Oh, and that was fun. Yeah, you did great with the TikTokers. Well done. I learned a lot on how to talk to people about these things. I gotta tell you, like, I was worried about talking to the TikTokers. One of the things I'm always worried about is losing my patience. Like, losing my patience and losing my cool and getting angry. Letting my emotional self take control. Allowing my emotions to run the show. And one thing that I was pretty proud of dealing with these TikTokers, I would say, for the most part, my emotions didn't really take over. And I think that just the understanding and the expectation that I'm going to be talking to a lot of straight up illiterate people. Like, I don't consider myself to be the best researched on this subject. Straight up. Like, I don't consider myself, like, I haven't read all the material. I don't know everything about everything that's ever happened, right? I think that there are people who come into my chat fairly regularly who I think are better read than I am. And I really value them being here, right? And so to me, like, so I don't consider myself very literate, but the people who are coming in from places like TikTok and these sorts of things, like, these people are, like, literally, like, I've never even read the Communist Manifesto. What is that even? Like, that's where I think these guys are at. And they straight up are just like, I read one article once from the CIA that said. But we'll get back to the TikTokers. I look forward to it, in fact. Grinning says, on Fox News, back when I used to post there, I would have 10 accounts logged in at a time. I could make anyone disappear that I wanted to. What? Good evening, Anemone. How you doing? Some content moderation systems just count the number of reports, so you can't leverage that against the worst so you can leverage that against the worst actors. Yeah, I mean, like, it just seems so clear to me that the system is designed to respond positively to trolls, right? Like, in the early days of the internet, there was just always this understanding, like, just don't feed the trolls. Just don't, like, they're trolls. Like, they're literally only there to make people upset. That's their job. Or that's not their job, but that's their goal, right? And now, like, corporate America has gotten involved with the internet now. Like, back when the internet first started, it was just like, you know, kids like me and like some tech nerds, right? And we were all just like spreading around bullshit most of the time, right? There's the whole like piracy era and all of this, and but now corporate America has really invested heavily in the internet now, and they don't view trolls the way that trolls were initially viewed, which is just fucking losers to ignore. I spend no time on them, like literally no time. Like, move on with your life. Because those types of people are not actually arguing with you in good faith. They're Nazis, right? They're arguing with you just in order to frustrate you and make you upset and angry. And but now we've created systems that rewards that kind of behavior, because a troll is a massive asset to a system that rewards engagement, right? And the best way to engage people and to keep them engaged is to make them angry. And so what we have now with these algorithms is a system that makes it so that the most treasured assets that exist on the internet are the worst people, because those are the people that are keeping people engaged, which is the whole point. Stip is all about Tito, man. I gotta learn something about this guy. Tito should be the leader of all communist states. Bold move from me there. Well, God, the piracy era of the internet has been great. I mean, I actually argue that the piracy era of the internet is over, right? That like, when I was using the internet, that was the, like, when the internet was first starting, that was the era of piracy, dude. You could get anything. You could get literally anything. And just, like, if you knew where to look, if you knew how to find it, you could find literally anything. And now it's mainly limited because a lot of these companies have found ways to ensure that you have to get, like, a legitimate thing. And most importantly, I think a lot of these companies have recognized that a big reason why people were going to piracy on the internet instead of using traditional methods is because it was easier. Like, that's something I think about a lot, is that, like, sometimes I was pirating, like, when I was a kid, I was pirating stuff not because I was like, hey, fuck you, man, like, I'm gonna get you, or even to save money. I literally was just like, oh, if I do this, I can have this on my computer tonight. I can like, I don't need to go to a shop. I don't need to ask my mom to get me to a mall or something. I don't need to spend any time. I literally could just click this and it downloads directly onto my computer. And corporate America and corporate culture hadn't figured it out. They hadn't gotten to the point. Like, Steam didn't exist, right? Like, these companies hadn't figured out how to do this properly. And so but now they have, right? And so there's, like, and now now they've put up enough safeguards and enough kind of security stuff that it's actually easier to just interact with the systems normally now. Because, like, unless it straight up is, like, I am dead broke, I have $0, I cannot afford to do it. Like, unless that's where you're at, then then interacting with the system as it is now is actually more efficient. It's easier than it is to try to pirate it. And that's how the era of piracy really has come to an end. Like, you can still find shows, but, like, so, you know what I mean? Like, I don't think that's a big deal, right? Like, going and downloading an episode of, like, Rick and Morty or something, right? Like, no, it doesn't hurt the advertisers. It doesn't hurt any of those people. It doesn't really matter to those people. It's just a way to spread that into the world and keep the culture alive, if you ask me. That I wouldn't be too surprised to find out that these guys not only know about the piracy that's happening, but actively encourage it. I don't know why you wouldn't, you know? Like, there is this idea that, like, well, the advertisers, and I was like, yeah, the advertisers are making hundreds of billions of dollars. Like, they don't give a shit if there's, like, 1 million downloads of a show where that got watched 100 million times. Like, it's just not gonna... You're gonna spend more time chasing the piracy and spend more money chasing the piracy than you would get from the viewership. So just let it occur, you know? Just let it occur, which seems to be where they're at now. That, like, yeah, technically it's illegal, but do I really want to spend all my fucking time going after this? And so it's still kind of useful for, like, if you want to watch a show and it's not really, like, it's not, you know, you don't want to get Crave or Hulu or any of this kind of stuff. Like, so it's useful on that kind of level. But, like, back in the day of the internet, like, if you wanted Photoshop, if you wanted Microsoft Word, if you, like, think of a program. If you wanted Windows, if you wanted fucking Windows, right? You could just get a copy of that. And it was easy to do. And it isn't anymore. Like that, so that era is over, for sure. That era is over, and for good or for bad, I kind of have mixed feelings about it. You know, some people are really hardcore about, like, free information and piracy it's the way, but I tend to just take a look at the early days of internet piracy as just being the people being like, no, this is how this should work. Like, this is how this should work. Like, we'll pay you, but like, if your system doesn't look like this, then we're not interested in engaging in it. Because, like, all of the systems became like that. They all, like, what is LimeWire? Like, LimeWire is Steam. Like, it's the same fucking thing. It took corporate America a minute to figure it out. Comcast is extremely efficient in sending out infraction letters to pirates. I'm up to 3, so I can't get much more. Well, here, it's different in Canada. They send out letters, but it doesn't matter. They literally can't legislate. Like, that's just the hard truth of it. They literally can't legislate. So they can just send you a letter being like, spooky letter, and that's all. And I'm just like, okay. But, like, again, like, who gives a shit? Like, this is I just keep finding myself saying this over and over and over again. Like, who actually loses if somebody goes and pirates your show? Like, who's actually losing there, right? Like, the person who's pirating it wins because they actually get to interact with your media, and they're pirating it because they can't or won't be able to see it otherwise, right? Like, the alternative from their perspective is that they won't see it, and that's the truth. Like, so if they pirate it, then they do see it, right? But if they don't pirate it, then they're not going to see it. And so who loses? Well, the artist certainly loses, right? The advertiser already loses. Like, the advertiser's already lost in the conversation, right? But the advertiser's already making billions of dollars anyway. So it's just like the most petty bullshit. And how do you actually make money in entertainment, really? By creating a fan base, by getting people interested and involved in what it is you're doing. That's how you actually make money in entertainment. Like, the first movie that Ben Stiller made didn't make $100 billion, right? But his 10th movie did, right? So you're building it up over time. And if you're just going to cut people out and just make it so that nobody can actually connect, you'll never build a fan base. You'll never actually, nobody will ever actually see your work. No one will actually interact with it in a meaningful way, right? And especially now in this era where Disney is dominating so heavily, and dominating is the word. Like, they're making 80% of the market share. Like, they should be sued for monopoly for sure. But but that's not going to happen because they own the fucking system. But in any case, but in this era where you have this overt dominant cultural force, like, everybody should be in favor of the system of piracy. Everyone should be. It's how you're going to make more money over time. Like, maybe you're not going to make more money on this specific project, and that's always the argument. It's like, well, those eyeballs should have been watching this, so that advertising money would go to that person, right? That's always the argument. But it's so, and I mean, of course it's short-sighted. It's capitalists, right? That capitalists can only think in short-term ways. They don't understand the concept of long-term planning. But the truth is that when you do think about it from a long-term planning kind of way, then, well, yeah, that person that watched that thing through piracy, right, and it may fall in love with it, and then will watch your next project, and even if they go to the next project and pirate that, well, by the time they go down the line, maybe you'll have had a true blue dyed-in-the-wool fan, right? Because they keep seeking you out. They keep trying to find you. They're just not in a position where they can afford or are willing to pay for what is being seen. And so the alternative is that they just don't ever engage with it. Which I think that's a big L. I think you lose as an artist or a creator. I think you lose under those circumstances, and that I think if you want even the possibility that these types of people are ever going to give you any money, then you need to keep them engaged, And the best way to keep them engaged is to just promote piracy, frankly. Right? And that the people who want to give you money or who are already connected to your systems and all that kind of stuff will do it. Right? And obviously will. Obviously will. Right? And so I just think that if you go after pirates, you're spending resources to hurt yourself. It's so dumb. Comcast kicks you off the service if you get 6 infractions. They cancel your account permanently. Comcast is one of those... I hear about the Comcast shit. I feel like the South Park guys really nailed it. Like, they have a monopoly. They don't have competitors, so they can just act however they want, right? And near as I can tell, Comcast is just, like, total dill holes, so... Yeah, the piracy these days is not what it used to be. Honestly, I'm happy with clicking through ads for movies and streaming anime for free. Yeah, I mean, like... My feeling is as simple as just as people want to watch it. Why are we putting barriers? Why are we erecting any barriers whatsoever? And now we're like seeing with like you've got like a Patreon system where like literally you have independent creators just being like, hey, this is an example of the thing that I would like to create. I can't do it without money. And so now you've got people who are just like, oh yeah, here's some money. Just create shit. Just create random shit. Right? And like the whole concept of like needing to rely on advertisers for as your sole form of revenue, I think is something that should die off. Right? Like literally what is an advertisement except just somebody saying buy this dumb shit you don't need. Like, it just seems to me like the better way of doing it would to build a reputation as being a good creator and have a, like, this is essentially what Disney Plus is when you think about it, right? Like, Disney Plus is basically just like a place where all of Disney exists. And so give us money and we'll give you access not only to all the stuff that Disney has, but all of the future potential of what Disney can create. So give us money. So when you buy Disney Plus, you're basically just being a Patreon of Disney. That it's no longer an advertising system. They don't put advertisements on the stuff they're showing you, right? Netflix doesn't put advertisements in the middle of the show, right? It's a Patreon system. And that's how people should be thinking about creation and art and that sort of thing. They shouldn't be thinking about it from a how do you woo advertisers, right? You should be thinking about how do you please the masses of people and get them to support you financially. Weird Al promoted piracy of the movie of his life story. He should. I don't think Weird Al would be popular if it wasn't for piracy. Straight up. I think that if a guy like Weird Al didn't, like, I know that when I was a kid on the internet, I downloaded all of his shit on LimeWire and all that stuff. And if it hadn't been for that, I never would have heard most of it. Straight up. I think Weird Al is exactly the type of person I'm talking about when I'm talking about like building a fan base and creating this spreading this kind of stuff. Disney Plus has lost billions, much of it hidden in the accounting methods. It's bad for them. I mean, Disney is going to go into a fairly major decline pretty quickly because I think that they've lost credibility as storytellers. That's the death knell of any of it, right? That like I think about myself, right? Like just my own personal relationship with Disney. I was a Disney kid. Like I have watched Little Mermaid, Beauty and the Beast, Aladdin, Lion King, even ones like Tarzan and Hunchback of Notre Dame. I've seen those movies dozens of times, right? Like I could probably sing most of the songs, right? Like I was a Disney fucking kid. I was watching Disney cartoons. I was on the Disney. I was like a fucking Mouseketeer, dude. Like the dream of going to Disney World was alive and well in my young heart, and all of this kind of stuff. And to go through the journey of like being a Disney file, like, and some of the stuff that they've produced is legitimate masterpieces. Yeah, Emperor's New Groove. Granting, if you want to see a really brilliant film tied in to Emperor's New Groove, and you can only pirate it because Disney tries to suppress it. You need to find the Sweat Box. The Sweat Box is a documentary. So Sting did all the music for Emperor's New Groove, and in his contract he said my wife gets to come in and do a documentary of the making of the film Emperor's New Groove of this project. And Disney, of course, said, yeah, that's fine. And what she captures through this documentary process is a catastrophe. That the creation of Emperor's New Groove was a disaster. And there's no other real way to articulate it. That the original director was the director of The Lion King, Richard Ailes, and he had this idea of creating another kind of Lion King-esque with like Disney and prestige, that kind of thing. And he literally goes down to South America and tours the Mayan ruins and all of this kind of stuff. And he wants this film to be epic in scope and to be a story. He had so many different ideas, and so they create the first act of Richard Ailes' idea, and they present it to the Disney executives, and they essentially say that it's a failure, that they don't like it, and he needs to restart. They need to restart the film and create a new story because this isn't going to work. This isn't going to work. And what this leads to is Richard Ailes leaves the project, right? So they have to find a new director, and then essentially the creative process becomes this catastrophe where literally, like, Yzma is a good example. They removed Yzma from the movie at one point. And the creator of Yzma, the animator, who was the same animator that made Cruella de Vil, has to go and argue to keep Yzma in the project. And Sting had made 6 songs for the project, all of which get scrapped. They literally, at one point, I think to give you a sense of the epicness of like the colossal catastrophes that occurred during the making of this, at one point they hired a musician to score the movie. They watched the movie with the score that they paid for, and then they scrapped it and hired someone else to rescore the movie. And they were just constantly doing this. Like, characters were out, characters were in. This was like the whole idea of Kuzco turning into a llama didn't happen until later on that wasn't the first thing. That wasn't that was never Richard Ailes' idea. And what was so brilliant about the Disney executives were not being cruel or malicious or vindictive. That the entire time when they were talking, and they would talk to the camera, like they weren't shadowy figures, they were like nice guys. That was the best part. Like, one of the guys literally was like he looked like fucking Ned Flanders. He had the big fucking glasses, the mustache, like was wearing like cardigans and sweaters and stuff, and was walking around being like, okay guys, I just don't think that this is working for what we need to do. And I don't, like, they weren't being mean. They weren't being mean. And at one point the camera asks him about this, and he said very clearly, we need every project to be a success, because it's not that we want people to see this movie, it's that we want them to see the next movie. And that if this movie isn't good, then they won't come and see the next movie even if it is good. And I'll never forget that at the end of the project, like, these guys came in and they were ruthless. They were ruthless, like mercenaries. Like, they were brutal. Real nice guys and really eye on the prize. Like, as an artist myself, I don't hate this. Like, you've got to be that way. And I understand why Disney's suppressing it, but at the same time I think to myself, like, why? Like, show people what it actually takes to make this stuff. And maybe people actually respect the arts again if you do that. And and at the end of the project, these guys say, yeah, I wish we had been more ruthless faster. I'm like, whoa, like, you guys were brutal this entire time, and the end point, the thing that you wish you had to change is you wish you had been harder, faster. And I think about, yeah, okay, so they probably think like, when Richard Ailes was pitching us this idea, instead of giving him time to create a first act that we then crushed back, just say straight away, Richard, this isn't the thing. This isn't gonna. We need more focus. We need more focus. Anyway. Sweatbox. The Sweatbox. It's a really brilliant documentary that captured I think what I would call the old way of thinking about how Disney thought about the creative process and thought about itself in the culture. And I think that that's gone now with Disney. I think Disney is prodigal. Good to see you, prodigal CIA. Yeah, I thought the CIA got you. Nope, just straight up internet problems. I think I'm not important enough for the CIA to even notice me. I'd be surprised if I even had a file. Disney has forgotten this, or if they certainly don't care about it. They don't care about the idea that this film needs to be good so that people will come and see the next film. That they're so dominant in the culture and in the market, and they've been that way for so long that they've lost sight of the idea that they need to be good. And they've essentially just been producing CIA propaganda and political propaganda for decades now. The entire Marvel run is essentially CIA propaganda. The Star Wars fiasco, and there's no other way to call it. Like, it's a total fucking fiasco what they did to Star Wars. Like, literally, the new trilogy they made is an unredeemable failure. Like, it's a disaster from any angle you look at it from. That unless you really are one of these people who's like, a female protagonist is the greatest thing to ever happen to Star Wars in the history of cinema. Unless you're really that person. Like, there's no defense. Like, the movies were terrible. They betrayed everybody. Like, it was a complete... the only reason it made money is because it was called Star Wars. But, like, that was the trilogy that just made me go, like, yeah, I'm done. Like, I'm not watching Andor. I'm not watching fucking The Mandalorian. I'm not watching Boba Fett. I'm not watching any of this shit. It's over. It's done. They ruined it for me, right? And I'm the guy. Like, I should be the guy who's going like, oh my god, the new Mandalorian season is coming out, you guys. Can you even believe it? Oh my goodness. Like, I'm the guy. If anybody is that guy, it's this guy. And it's done. It's over. Right? And it's the same thing with, like, Star Trek. It's the same thing with all of it. And they're never gonna get me back. There's nothing that they can say. There's nothing they can do to convince me. Because I am at a point now with these people, with these storytellers, where even if they did make something good, my assumption is that they are only setting me up to betray me later. And when you have that kind of cultural force and that cultural, like all the fucking remakes they did, where they literally took all of their best work, the masterpieces that they created, and just shit on them. Just shit on them. Like, what they did to Pinocchio was an abomination. I don't think that that's a harsh language to use. The original Pinocchio is a masterpiece. Like, a literal masterpiece. It's not non-ironically. Every single shot, every single frame of Pinocchio is a work of art. Is like a Picasso-level masterpiece. The entire section with Monstro the Whale is some of the best artwork put on film, bar none, period, hands down. The fact that they were hand drawing this shit, frame by frame, creating a new standard by which we should expect to see in cinema, to have it turned around and just shoved through a CGI, just like a deadening the death of art, and shoving it through these like AI procedural processes, and just putting like fucking sure Tom Hanks is Geppetto, fine, right? Just just distilled out from it any of the glory, any of the basic humanity. They even destroyed any moral message that existed. They literally took out all of the aspects of the story that were required for it to even have a meaning. And I don't think they're capable of telling a story anymore. Because to tell a story means that you have to accept that your protagonist has flaws, that those flaws are obvious and apparent, and that the person you're seeing is not a perfect, pristine, godlike hero, but is someone who goes on a journey of change, and at the end has changed in some way. And I don't think Disney storytellers are interested or even capable of that any longer. And so someone like me has already abandoned them, but the society is going to do it soon. Like, they're going to start putting out some of this new bullshit, and people are just not going to bite. They're just not going to watch, right? And that's the end of it, right? If people just stop paying attention to you, you're done. You're finished. And that's exactly what's going to happen to Disney. And I don't think they know how to stop it. Because anytime somebody comes in and tries to stop it, because they see it coming, anytime anybody comes in and tries to stop it, they get chased out. Because Disney is now no longer a storytelling institution, they're a propaganda institution. And the propagandists are the people who have the control in Disney now. I still want to see what happened after Stargate Universe ended. I'm still butthurt over that one. Yeah, I mean, it just seems like they're, like, telling good stories is no longer the goal. It's just not, it's... have you seen what they did to the Addams Family? Wednesday is not in keeping with the Addams Family ethos. My young teen loved it, though. I'm always up to watch TV with my kids. Yeah, honestly, I gotta tell you, from what I've seen of Wednesday, I haven't seen all of it, but I don't know, seems fine. Like, Addams Family is not, like, how do you ruin that? Like, how do you whiff? How do you whiff on Addams Family? Like, I just don't think you can. Like, it's not like there was ever much of a story, right? Like, it's not like there was ever this sort of like literally the seminal statement of the Addams Family is they're creepy and they're kooky. That's it. That's the whole thing. And so when I sit down and I watch Addams Family on Wednesday, I expect to see something creepy and kooky. And I got to tell you, seems like they're doing that. Seems like they're doing that. Creepy and they're kooky. The woman that they have playing Wednesday seems to understand it. It's Tim Burton, so he understands the sentiment. Although I got to tell you, from a visual standpoint, it's some of his weakest work. Like, I really do think that he's very light on the touch on this project. I think that he is kind of worried about, he's taking no risks. That's the thing to say. He's taking no risks. That all of the decisions seem very like, this is fine, you know? And that's disappointing for me, because Burton's not a good storyteller. He was never a good storyteller, but he's a brilliant painter. That if he had been born 150 years ago, he would be an amazing painter, and I think that's who he is. And it's just that the money is in cinema, and so he became a director because that's where the art is. And but he is a painter, and to see him be at the helm of something like Wednesday, I think maintains the integrity of what the Addams Family sort of demands, because that sort of sentiment is very Burton-esque, right? Burton already gravitates in that kind of Addams Family trajectory, so it does kind of maintain it, but he's not really taking any risks. He's not really pushing anything. He's not doing anything that's truly evocative. So it all just seems, I think where I'm landing with this is it all just seems very pat. You know? Like, the 90s version of the Addams Family was definitely better. And it was better because they were taking bigger risks and doing cooler stuff. Like, the only thing that really makes Wednesday, quote-unquote, Addams Family, is Wednesday herself. That the character understands Wednesday, and Wednesday is Wednesday, and how she's reacting to the world around her is very much how she would interact and all that kind of stuff. But all of the like really overwhelmingly gothic creation that came out of the 90s Addams Family is not there. And like Thing, the hand, kind of encapsulates it, right? Because Thing was always just a hand. But this Thing has like stitching, and so they've like made decisions to try to make him even more grotesque. But he just ends up kind of being a little bit goofy. And so it, while I think they are in that Addams Family universe, and it's all there, and it's all that kind of stuff, and that's all great, because of the nature of how they've done it, it's just not... Yeah, they're just not taking any risks. I think that's really what it is, and I've already said it. I think my only issue with the show is that Wednesday is kind of Batman and approaches dangerously close to a Mary Sue. Yeah, I don't know. I just think that... I just don't know that Wednesday as a character can hold an entire show. That if this show had been a movie, I think it would have been better. That's where I think I'm at. That, like, take this show idea and just into a movie, and then I think you've got a really tight 2-hour script of like this mystery, whodunit, what's going on, but everything just seems a little bit stretched out, just a little bit more time than we need. These characters over here don't really matter. Like this rivalry over here doesn't really matter. There seems to just be a lot going on, and not a lot of like, let's tell a good story and actually get somewhere really interesting and cool with it. And frankly, a lot of the goth sentimentality that existed throughout the 90s, Addams Family just isn't there. Like, literally, just isn't there. And that's disappointing. Yeah, that's how it is. Like, I don't hate Wednesday. I don't hate the show. I just don't think it's doing anything that's like, the only reason anyone is watching this show is because it is Addams Family. That's it. That it itself is not actually doing anything to make me go, whoa. Like, I'm yet to have that in this, and I don't think it's going to happen. Whereas when you watch like the 90s Addams Family, like, there was really fun, interesting, strange, eclectic shit happening all the time in those movies. Just even the figure of Morticia in the 90s movie, where she would be there and the beam of light would be across her eyes, and she'd just be standing there, and she'd say something in that kind of whispered tone, mysterious kind of thing to Gomez. That's been abandoned. That Catherine Zeta-Jones, I think, is doing a great job as Morticia, and I think she's a great cast. That's a good decision. But all of that air of magic and mystery, and the magic in Wednesday is much more obvious. That Wednesday has visions, right? Straight up, she sees the future, right? She has like magic, and magic is way in your face. Like, there are werewolves. There are these things that do exist. Whereas in the Addams Family, it was always kind of like alluded to. It was always off on the side. It was always like an inference of those sorts of things were always like they would within a throwaway line they would imply some kind of magical thing, but the magic never really took the center stage and was never really a spotlight shone on it. And I mean, the existence of thing is magic is real in the Addams Family universe for sure. So yeah, Addams Family are basically rich capitalist sociopaths. I realized this recently. Yeah, I think the Addams Family movies from the 90s really touched on this, that without their money, they're just losers, right? Like that there is a moment when they're poor, where they've been thrown out of their house and they basically just become dejected losers, right? And I think that's definitely true. And look, I'm probably going to continue watching Wednesday just because I think that it is doing a decent job. It's not actively betraying anybody like a lot of the shit that I see these days. I think that they are like constantly moving forward with this idea that like, no, this is who this character is, and we're going to put her in this situation. She's going to do this, and I'm looking at it being like, yeah, you're right. They're not actively betraying Wednesday. When the Christina Ricci version of who Wednesday was, even going back to like the 1940s and 50s version of the Addams Family, that version of Wednesday, it all works forward, and I'm looking at her and I go, yep, you did it. So no open betrayal. But it doesn't mean that it's the greatest thing I've ever seen in my life. It doesn't mean that they're pushing anything or trying to like illuminate anything. And yeah. So I think if I were to nothing is weird anymore. Like, I love goth shit, but I mean, come on, that shit just doesn't matter anymore. But I think that's kind of what I'm saying, is that, like, they're not actually... Like, there is a goth culture that is modern and does exist right now, and none of that seems to be making it in. It's competent. There you go. It's competent. They're telling a competent story that I think at the end we'll all be like, how competent, you know? And at this stage in the game, I think we're so deprived of basic competence in storytelling. We're so deprived of it that when we see someone come out and do competent storytelling, we go, oh, that's great. Oh man, I love that. It's competent. Wow, they told a story with a flawed protagonist who changed as the story went on. They did it. Wow, competence. You know what I mean? And I feel like that's what we're seeing with Wednesday. I'm not trying to shit on it, because actually, like, it's fine. But the story that I think I will be constantly recommending, especially after last week's episode, is Rick and Morty. Rick and Morty has officially, with last week's episode, officially has done it. Which is to say that most of the times television shows get worse over time, that they just kind of follow through on a momentum where they know they have a fan base, they know that people are familiar with the characters, and so they just kind of put them into a series of events, and so the show gets worse over time. Friends is like the perfect example of this, where the show just gets worse. Like, after about the third season, the show just gets worse over time, but it's just worse. We're so invested in it that we're gonna tune in. We're gonna watch when are Ross and Rachel gonna figure this shit out? Oh my god, I can't believe they're getting married. Like, it's just like those characters just become part of our lives and part of the collective consciousness, and so we all just kind of went along with it. But the show was getting absolutely worse over time. Whereas Rick and Morty, the best show they did aired last week. Last week was the best show they've done, and it showed that they're interested in actually accepting that Rick and Morty as characters are changing, and as they are learning and having experiences within the world, they're not just remaining the same. And even the relationship that they're having with one another is also changing. And Rick really articulates that he needs to change how he's interacting with Morty. And Morty has changed as a character, that as the show has gone on, he's become more confident and more capable because he's had all these experiences. And so he's obviously more competent and more capable, while still also making mistakes and still also needing to get through it. And now his grandfather is starting to acknowledge that Morty needs to be at the helm more and needs to make his own decisions, and that he needs to be more supportive of that. It was a very beautiful episode in that way, because it wasn't just Rick is there and he's got this idiot grandson sidekick. That it really was like an episode that was about them as grandfather and grandson, and as a true partnership, and trying to negotiate the reality of what that would mean. And so right now, when I think about what's worthwhile television that people should be watching, I think Rick and Morty is probably the only one that really springs to mind. Because the people who are writing it are storytellers. They do entire episodes that are about storytelling and about the structure of storytelling and how it actually works and how to tell a good story. And they're constantly committed, not just episode by episode, but season by season, to this idea that you need to have flawed characters who change over time. And most stories that we have ever seen don't actually do that. Like, especially not in the modern era. That if they are a flawed character, they don't change, right? And there are exceptions, obviously. Like Breaking Bad is an obvious exception, right? Like that's actually a really brilliant show for a lot of reasons. Yeah, and I like the way Wednesday pushes the first people's narrative. Yeah, now that would shock the culture. Yeah, there's that. Yeah. I saw the whole show. I have to say it was just really good regardless. I have maybe enough attention for 2 more seasons. Yeah, you know what? And honestly, Con, look, from what I've seen, seems competent, seems good. My only thing would be I hope they take more risks. Like I hope they do more just visually interesting stuff. You know what I mean? Like I feel like so much like the sword fight. Like the sword fight that they had was a fine sword fight, but it was Marvelized. Everything's been Marvelized now. So you know that the things that they're doing are not possible. Like you know that they're not even within the realm of possibility. What these people are doing. And so they no longer become impressive. Because you know that there's this whole behind the scenes thing, there's a whole kind of thing. And it fails to enter that hidden dragon kind of where it's so over the top that it's obviously supposed to be mystical. So it ends up being in this kind of false sort of space. Whereas when you see like really impressive sword fights, like the Princess Bride, the sword fight between Inigo Montoya and Wesley, probably one of the best sword fights ever filmed. All of the stuff that they did was in the realm of possibility, and I feel like unless you're going really in the direction where this is straight up magic, and that's essentially where Marvel has ended up, where everything is just over the top, but we're all supposed to believe that it's still real. Right? Like these characters are real and they exist in a real universe, in a real world where everything is real, but everything is at this level where it's so over the top so as to be rendered unbelievable. And I feel like that's that ethos and that idea has infected a lot of media. Whereas just a straight up sword fight, I think, would be way more impressive. I think we would all be way more impressed by an actual real fight. And but I just think that we don't really know what we're doing anymore as storytellers. And I think that's across the board. Like, there's a lot of uncertainty, a lot of instability going on in the industry. Yeah, and I agree with this, actually. The First Nations narratives are folded into the show. So when I talk about risks and I talk about that kind of stuff, I think they are taking a bit of a risk with that by pushing that narrative forward. I tend to forget, living in Canada, like the First Nation narrative has been pushed forward a lot. There are obviously still contingents who deny it and all of that. That's definitely the truth. But I don't think that's the same throughout the United States. I think in the United States there's still quite a bit of sort of I don't know how to say it properly. Like, people don't want to interact with it. And so to take the opportunity with Wednesday to put that stuff in there, and on top of that, do it in a way that seems genuine. Like, when Wednesday starts talking about the First Nations stuff, that's right in character for her. Like, that's exactly the type of shit she has always done. And so when she did it, I didn't think, oh, here's the political grandstanding. I thought, here's Wednesday being Wednesday. And so it really worked out. Zed, with Rick, good to see you, by the way, bud. With Rick and Morty, did you know the episode from the current season with Morty trapped in the VR world is literally what Mormons communicate, that we're all just one God split into billions of humans, and how we need to realize we are one God so we can join the other gods. That's why are they pushing Mormon ideology? I'm with you I'm with Finley on this. This splitting idea, it exists in Hinduism and Buddhism. It's fairly ubiquitous. It's fairly ubiquitous. I think that it's something that you see in a lot of religions and a lot of ideas, and it's something that I've even talked about. Like, we are a singular energy. Quantum mechanics teaches us that we are a singular energy, that we live as a singular people, and we exist in this universe sustained by this singular energy. That for whatever reason, and we don't know why it does this, but it organizes itself to create differences that we perceive. But what it means fundamentally is that you and I are the same energy. So you are me and I am you, and that there is a part of you that is me, and there is a part of me that is you. And so if I'm mean to someone or cruel to someone, I'm really being cruel to myself. And this gets into sort of the high religious idea of when we go to war or when we fight, we are fighting ourselves. That when we destroy someone else, we are destroying ourselves, and that what we are experiencing is a conflict, truly an internal conflict. That when we externalize evil and say that, oh, you are evil, we are looking at a part of ourselves and an aspect of ourselves and saying, that is apart from me and evil, when really it is your projection of your own shame and your own hatreds onto someone else because you refuse to see it within yourself. And so that breaking apart, that we're all separate and we're all separate individuals, right? And hyper-individualism is part of our culture. It's not real, because we all are part of a singular energy, right? Just how red blood cells are not the body, but they are required to make the body, right? So is our relationship with the universe and with creation. That we are not ourselves the creative energy or the creative force, or God, if you want to put it in Christian language, that each of us are not on that level, but we do make up that being. So we are all part of it, and we're not separate. That the evangelical Christians get it wrong when they talk about God. They talk about God as if, and the modern atheists, by the way, too. They talk about God as an external force, a man in the clouds, something to be found, like a being, an object that you can find. When the theologians, like Aquinas and all these guys, and Isaac Newton for that matter, always talked about God as the collective force of the universe, and that we are all part of and we're all connected with. That and ideas like the Trinity and all of this were early methods to try to struggle with that idea of how are we an individual that is separate while also simultaneously part of this large, grand system that clearly exists. And so when I see that kind of, and this is kind of what I'm saying about Rick and Morty, is that like that is a big idea for them to tackle. That is an enormous idea for them to take a swing at, right? And to tell a story based around that very, very difficult idea. 1 second, guys. Sorry, my dog. Okay, Milo. I know, buddy. It's really dumb that your face is like this, eh? Isn't this stupid? Isn't this stupid, my man? Let's get you sorted. Want some treats? You want some treats, my man? Yeah, good boy, buddy. Hack it out. I know, it's really dumb how your face is, isn't it? Isn't it stupid how we've done that to your face? Good man. Sorry about that, guys. Milo gets caught in that reverse sneezing thing, and if I don't help him, he can hurt himself really badly. And the, yeah, and so I really respect Rick and Morty because they're taking a swing at that, about that concept of how each of us are all part of a same system, and that we're all kind of a fractured. And Rick and Morty's always done this with the concept of the multiverse, right? The concept of the multiverse has always sort of existed in sci-fi, and it's always sort of existed in the nomenclature. But Rick and Morty really were the first show to be like, what would that actually mean? And what does it mean to be part of like an infinite universe where there's infinite amounts of dimensions, where anything is actually possible? And in that way, I actually think Rick and Morty is very mind-opening, right? Because we tend to look at our reality as the reality and as the only way that things could actually be. Well, here's a show that's telling you explicitly from the jump that your reality is just one of an infinite amount of realities, and anything that is possible to exist does. And why? Who knows? It just does, right? And so the only thing that I drop into this conversation that gets me into a bit of trouble is, do we think that this system that we are experiencing, and this idea of the multiverse and all this kind of stuff, do we think that it is itself conscious? And does it have its own agenda? Is it trying to figure something out for itself? Who's to say? It's difficult for me to believe that it isn't conscious, because if I'm conscious, then it should be, right? But maybe I'm wrong. And I'm certainly not going to go to war about it. Wednesday being shocked at her parents kissing the backseat was a real mistake. I bet Wednesday learned about sex watching Minotaurs going out of the basement. Yeah, I don't believe she was shocked, just sick of it. Yeah, not shocked, but for Gomez and Morticia's kids, they would have seen that constantly. Yeah, it would have gone unremarked at best. Yeah. You were talking about non-duality. That's not the same. Pretty close. Pretty close. I feel like what happens in a lot of times is that like you have this sort of traditional way of communicating about things, and I don't. Like I don't really respect tradition. So like it is or it isn't in my view. Oh, I have to get to work. Somebody else distract John with hot takes about art and culture. Yeah, that's right. So anyway, we got a half hour left on the clock here, guys. I hope you guys are all doing really well out there. We kind of went down a little rabbit hole of meta reality. Like, what is it to be alive? What is it to be a person that exists in reality? In many ways, I think it's quite freeing to think about we are in many ways trapped in what is happening here. We didn't ask to be here. We're just here, right? And we don't know why. We don't understand why. And historically, theologians have tried to say that, oh, well, the force of creation, what we call God, is good and created us for a reason. And I think I've come to understand more and more that we were just created because it was possible. that there was no intent behind creation, and that the thing that created us is just as lost as we are. I think that's the most likely truth of the situation that we find ourselves in. That it isn't that, like, there is some kind of Machiavellian force that's moving pieces around for some kind of intent. I think that we were created as a byproduct of its existence, and that it's looking at us with as much curiosity and oddness that we are looking back at it. And that we don't, that nobody knows what's happening. I think that that's kind of a freeing idea, because I think it frees us from the sort of fear of doing wrong by some sort of external force, but moreover, because of the nature of how it all exists and that we are a part of it, that we're actually collectively working on this journey of not just self-discovery of yourself as an individual, but discovery of the greater system of existence itself. And that such a being would never look at a part of its creation with disdain or hatred, because what chance do any of us have to even make sense of what's happening as we're caught up in this absolute chaotic tsunami of creation? That we're literally just spit out into this reality through a sexual coupling of two random people who you have no control over. That literally two people fuck and here you are, right? And it's as senseless as it gets. It doesn't make sense. Why do they even do it? Like, why does anyone even want to have a kid? What is this process of creation that we're all going through together? And so now you're here dealing with whatever nonsense is in front of you, right? And some of us have just tricked ourselves into believing that their nonsense matters more than other people's nonsense. That the life they're living is true and holy, and every decision they made is good, and where they are because they're the greatest. And it's just self-deception. It's obvious self-deception. That everyone is just dealing with the nonsense they have laid at their feet, trying to make the best decisions they can for the nonsense that they're dealing with. And that also includes the nonsense that exists in your own head. Because you don't control how your brain was put together. You don't control how your body was put together. You don't control the circumstances of your birth. You don't control your environment. You don't control anything. Literally, the only thing that you have any control over in this life is what you do. But what you do is most certainly going to be informed by this almost infinite array of variables that you find yourself within. It has to be. There's just no other way for it to be. This is why I find that these hyper-individualists to be so fraudulent and stupid. Because they think that the actions that they take matters more than the actions of everybody else combined that ever existed, let alone the people who do exist. The institutions and the power that exists within the society, and then the forces of creation themselves. It's just incoherent on the face of it. To be a hyper-individualist is to just be an arrogant, deluded child, and to refuse to acknowledge that there's these enormous systems that you're obviously a part of that you don't control, nor will you ever control. And the idea that you are where you are because you're the best is just arrogance. Just arrogance on the face of it. You literally think that you're more powerful than God himself. Shut the fuck up. Get the fuck out of here. Right? That you're born, you're here. The experiences you have are the experiences that just exist around us. That they exist because they must. They exist because they are possible to exist. Not because they're good. Not because they're bad. Not because you're being judged. Not because you're going through some kind of fire upon which you will come out a stronger person, or any of these kind of mythical narratives. That the experiences you are having because they can exist, and they're just happening to you because you're the one that needs to experience them. That's it. That they don't exist out of anything grander and no other narrative than that. Our experiences are our experiences, and they exist because they can. And that's it. And if we go through this existence, recognizing this in each other, and recognizing this reality that is certainly the truth about how we are in the world, then maybe we can actually focus our energy and focus what we want to be doing to actually create a heaven out of this place, to actually move forward and create something beautiful, so that when people get randomly spawned into this plane of existence, they'll have a nice time, and they'll learn something about not just themselves, but also the force of reality that certainly exists all around us, and that we can build something beautiful and lovely in this place. Or we can choose to be hyper-individualists and just eat everything, fuck everybody else, and turn this place into hell. We can do that too. We certainly can do that. And to me, the linchpin of it, the linchpin of whether or not we want to make a heaven or a hell out of this place, the linchpin of it comes down to whether or not you respect the force of creation that you're obviously in. That everything I just said, by the way, I don't consider any of that to be a drop of spirituality. I don't consider any of that to be a drop of hubu-jubu or anything. That is what is happening. For sure. And if you're going to try to stand up in front of me and say that that's not what's happening, you better have a really fucking clear argument. Because what is obviously happening is that there's a force of creation that we don't know why it exists or what it's doing. And I don't think it knows what it's doing. I think it just created everything because it could. And it didn't know what else to do. Like, it couldn't have prevented itself from doing it in the first place. I think it literally is just creation itself. Just creating everything because it can. And we're just caught in it. Dealing with that. And it's dealing with us as we're dealing with that. And we should probably look at one another and look at everybody around us with this kind of idea of like, oh, nobody knows what's going on. We're all just dealing with this. And instead of doing that, we've erected these false gods. Gods like money. Right? Like these odd little, weird little hierarchies that we're all supposed to pay fealty to that just seem to be spitting out pedophiles. And if we just tore down those fucking fake-ass gods and just paid attention to the reality of what this is and stopped trying to dominate one another, we'd actually make something pretty cool. Pretty fucking interesting. But I don't think we have ascended to much farther than the monkeys. Like, really. I think that we just created a language, and that's it. Like, literally the only thing that makes us different than an ape is that we have a more powerful articulator. And so we can articulate more abstract thoughts and create a stronger language. And that's allowed us to create, to interact with one another in an abstract way, to be able to create plans and create ideas and thereby build a civilization, right? But outside of that, we're still monkeys. Like we have all of the same impulses, we have all of the same desires, we have all of the same fears and all of the same susceptibilities, all of the same weaknesses, right? And we're about as intelligent. We just have language. That's it. And we just make sure make sure, and the funniest part about it is that we've made sure that the people who actually study language, literally the only thing that separates us from the rest of the animals, are poor, rejected, and degenerate. That's what we've done. Because the power structures that exist within the society are not interested in people recognizing that those power structures are, by their very definition, illegitimate. That in 200 years they won't exist. And they won't exist for very obvious reasons. Because they're A, destroying themselves, and B, useless. They don't actually achieve anything. They don't do anything. They don't make anything. They don't create anything. They're not useful or interesting. And eventually people will just stop using them. Because they're not useful. And they'll prove how useless they are as time goes forward, as they try to assert themselves more and more. Grinning says, God is just as lost as you are. That's some heavy substance shit. Almost makes me want to rant on TikTok. I mean, it has to fundamentally be the truth. Like, really. I started thinking about this when I was a beekeeper. I would watch bees come out of their eggs. And we have this mistaken idea that bees are a hive mind, and they're not. You can watch bees learn. You can watch bees learn. And every single time a bee would come out of its cell, and it would immediately start looking around, and it would start experimenting with itself. And this really made me start thinking, like, oh, every creature that gets spawned into this reality intrinsically attempts to answer the question, what am I capable of doing? That questions like, who am I, what is this, all that kind of the larger questions of life, as they say, those seem to come much later. That it takes a bit of time for people to get their bearings before they can even begin asking questions like, who am I, what are we doing here, any of that kind of stuff. That the first question, and it's not like they come out and then they ask it and then they do it. They're literally just driven by impulse, by an immediate desire that seems intrinsically baked into all life forms. What am I capable of doing? So when babies come out, because they're bad, like babies are bad, they suck, right? And so they try to find their fingers, right? They find their fingers, they find their toes, everything goes into their mouth, right? Because they're trying to discover what they're capable of doing, and those capabilities improve as the baby grows. But they're constantly in this, what am I capable of doing? You can see it most obviously with horses or deer when they're born. When a deer is born, it doesn't hit the ground and then look around and say, well, everybody's standing, I better stand, right? A deer comes out and immediately tries to find its legs. It immediately is like, what am I capable of? What can I do? What are we doing here? Right? And it's immediately trying to figure that out. And it seems to be a universal truth. Everything that gets spawned into this reality attempts instantly to answer the question, what am I capable of doing? So when you zoom that out into the highest possible level of creation, right? So we ask ourselves, why is there something rather than nothing? This is even like the atheist philosophers will ask this question. Why is there something rather than nothing? And the only answer that anybody can come up with that seems to have any sustainability to it is that, well, it had to have been that there was nothing, but then that nothing moved. And then that created a series of creative forces, that there was what's called the first mover, right? That's Isaac Newton that says this. And and so when I get to thinking about this, the idea of a first move or a first mover, well, certainly the very first thing that if nothing became conscious, the very first thing that it would attempt to discover is, what am I capable of doing? What am I capable of doing? Not what is good, what is evil, what is right, what is wrong, what is righteousness. Those things don't exist. That the very first thing that such a being would do is attempt to answer the question, what am I capable of doing? And if you are a being that is capable of creating all things that are possible to exist in all realities, then that's exactly what you do. And you don't think about it. You don't consciously perceive it. You just do it. And it's only after you've created all things that are possible to be created. It's only after you've done all of that you can go back and look at it and say, what is good? What is evil? What is right? What is wrong? That ostensibly this way of thinking about reality solves the problem of evil that has always been put at the foot of God. But it sacrifices something. Because the assumption of the old theologians was always that God knows what he's doing. That he's all-knowing. And my challenge on that is, maybe he knows everything now. Maybe it knows everything now. But it didn't know what it was doing when it did it. That it's only afterwards that it might have all of that knowledge. But it doesn't know what to do with it. And it certainly doesn't know how to handle it. Like, what's it supposed to do? You can go down really fucked up rabbit holes with this line of thinking. Like, think about like the Holocaust, right? Well, if God is so good, then why does the Holocaust exist? Right? Oh, okay. Well, if you're the being that's responsible for sustaining all things that are possible, and you, as simply a byproduct of your existence, are capable of creating all things that are possible, well, that means that you create the Holocaust. Just because you can. Not because you go, haha, but because you just can. And then afterwards, after you create it, you can look at it and be like, oh, fuck, that's fucked up. Boy, howdy, do I wish I hadn't created the Holocaust. Well, how does a force like this get rid of it? And the answer that you have to come up with and you have to accept is true is that it can't. It can't scrub it out of existence because it's essentially scrubbing it out of its own memory. And a being like this would scrub it out of its own memory and then see that there's something missing and then just create it. And so it would put itself into a perpetual and infinite loop of creating and destroying the same moment in time. Because it can't not. It has to. It's the force of all creation. It's the thing that created all things. And so what you have is you have this sort of being that's just caught. It's as trapped in this as you are. And so the only solution that it could possibly come up with is, I don't want this event to occur again, and so we need to spread that down this timeline. Always remember, never forget. Try to make it so that another Holocaust does not appear in this reality, to learn and try to continue on down that timeline in a way to hopefully continuously move towards something that is more gracious, that is better than that. And that, but the reality of existence seems to be that we're not, that the arc that of the universe is not about justice or goodness or evil or any of those concepts. That the arc of existence seems to be novelty. That things just get more novel over time. That things just change and become more interesting and different and stranger and odder and more amusing over time. And it's not about justice or goodness or truth or any of that. That it's just about things getting weird. That we used to be monkeys, and then we were tribes living in huts, and then we were a civilization. And now we're turning into a spacefaring people. And it's just getting more novel over time. Because I think that if you were a being of this sort, that boredom would be the greatest enemy you could ever face. And then, of course, you come ruddered up to the reality of like, well, so what if you die? Right? So what? Like, if we're talking about a being that is capable of creating all things that are actually intrinsically possible to be created, which means most certainly there is a hell. Most certainly there is a hell. Because it's possible. That you, in the face of that, are about as meaningful as an ant is to you. Like it's and you wouldn't trouble yourself with with what an ant considers just or righteous or true. And in the same way, I think the forces of the universe don't really trouble themselves or itself with whether or not you think what is actually happening is right or wrong. that really, I think the sentiment of the universe is more or less too bad. Anyway, that was a long wind. I love talking about that subject. It's one of my favorite things to talk about. I don't talk about it all that much because I know that I know that people tune out of it. I know it happens. But I like talking about it. Because I feel like it's good for us to get our feet rooted in a place of humility. I think that that's something that our society could use a really heavy dose of. A really, really heavy dose of humility. That we are a very arrogant people. We have people who are supposed to be considered serious thinkers walking around espousing a doctrine that is as arrogant as it possibly can get. That we literally are supposed to take seriously a person who's walking around saying, I am where I am because I'm the best. Like, get completely fucked. Yeah. How do I know my chat is getting like, okay, John, I get it. You're talking about this universal stuff. Great. We're going to talk about Elden Ring. Yeah, I just reinstalled Elden Ring yesterday, and then found out that my remote is broken. So I got to get a new remote tomorrow. And Cotton's right. At this point, aren't they on to PS5s now? So you could probably get a PS4 for just a couple $100. And I'm so glad that Elden Ring is actually winning awards and is actually beating like God of War for best game. That kind of stuff is happening. Because I do hope that more games become like Elden Ring. In that, I think the thing that was really successful about Elden Ring and that really confused the game community was that Elden Ring doesn't tell you how to do anything. Like, you get like a little kind of a series of tutorial screens, and there's like a little tutorial zone so that you can know what the basic controls are. But outside of that, it's very much like, yeah, here you are. Over there. Like, literally like a line. Just being like, there you go. Go that way. You talk to one guy, and the guy's like, you need to go to the castle. And you, like, look in the distance, and you can kind of see a castle. With a line just pointing at it. Right? And the game world was very dangerous. Really convinces you right away, don't take every fight you see. you can't beat everything you see. It puts you in your place really fast. And I remember I read an article where it was a UI creator, somebody who creates UIs for video games, talking about how amazing, or how I think he literally was just like baffled by how people were like fine with this. That Elden Ring's UI is basically nothing. It doesn't have a quest log. It doesn't have any markers. There's never an arrow hovering over someone's head saying I'm important, right? It doesn't exist. There's never a line outside of this just vague line that comes out of fire saying kind of go in that direction, right? There's no like quest bar ever. Like it's a compass. That's literally all you get is a compass and a map that you can open. Yeah, Dark Souls games are like that too. And so you've got huge segments of the video game industry just being like, how is this game fucking popular? Why do people like this game? From a UI perspective, it's a fucking total disaster. And I really do think that as gamers get older, they really... Like, I don't want my handheld. Like, I want to see what your tool can do. And then I want you to just let me have at it. One of the things I'm really excited about, that I'm dabbling with, so I'm a little tentative about sharing this, if you guys don't know about Unreal Engine 5, I think Unreal Engine 5 is crazy. What's happened? That they've released as a public source to just the fucking public an engine, a video game engine that's one of the most powerful one of the most powerful tools I've ever seen, and they've even got a tutorial for it. And I've been watching the tutorial, and I'm just floored by this. I'm absolutely flabbergasted that there's this creative tool that some company is just giving away for free with the promise of like, yeah, if you sell 1 million games, then you're going to pay us. But until you sell 1 million games, it's free. You just have it, and you can do what you want with it. And so I've been sitting down just watching the tutorial, and like what you see on the screen here, what you see on the screen right here, right now, I think that very shortly I'll be able to create myself. And I think that that's astounding. That there's this just amazing toy. Because at first when I started interacting with it, I thought, this is a program, right? This is going to be a serious thing and all that kind of stuff. And more as I've seen it go along, I'm like, no, this is a fucking toy. That this is just a creative toy that they've given creative people who don't have the ability to code. Like, I know in my early youth, when I was like 12, and I was like, video games. I love video games. I love playing video games. I love to make video games. And then I sat down and was like, oh, this is what it would take to make a video game. I think I would shoot myself if I tried to sit down and code a video game. Like, I literally think I would just rather hang myself. And so that was off the table. But now here's this toy that's basically just like, yeah, you know all the coding side of this? You know that whole coding part of it? Don't worry about that. And in fact, we're going to show you how to use this thing. We're just going to take you through the whole process. And it's fucking crazy. Like, what you're looking at right here is just a series of shapes that you can build in the engine, and then they texture it. And the texture system is overwhelmingly malleable. Like, and then they have a lighting system that is insane. And I can't believe that this exists. If I was a 12-year-old living in the world right now, this is what I would be pushing all my chips into. I would say school is a waste of time. University is total bullshit. Whatever job you think is important is total horseshit. I'm pushing all my chips into this. And I almost guarantee that there is some 12-year-old kid right now who's doing exactly this. And that kid is going to create some crazy awesome bullshit, which I'm so hyped for. I'm so hyped for that there's just going to be some independent designer that in 5 years they're going to come out with a game and they're like, yeah, I've been working on this in my parents' basement. I just think it's a cool game and all this, and it's just going to be absolutely staggering. And we're all just going to be like, how is this even within the realm of possibility? It's for sure going to happen. I wonder if you'd be able to model a game world from Ursula Le Guin's The Disposition. Yeah, there's no reason you can't. You can create anything with this thing. Like, that's the thing that completely floors me. Like, this castle that's right in front of you right here. So with a very simple retexturing, you could make this whole thing like a gleaming metal. So all of the, instead of it being made of rock, it would be made with a shiny chrome-like metal. And you could very easily just like install some spires and install some stuff to make it more of a modern look. And at the end of the day, it is just like shapes and textures. And they've just given you a tool to be able to create whatever shape you want. And I think the thing that really blew me away with this was when they were showing me, they said, oh yeah, so you can take this shape rather you've made. So you make a wall, right? You can texture it as stone, you can texture it this way, and there's layers of texturing, and there's all this crazy shit. You can also make it glass. And that's just built in. So it's just like suddenly the wall is glass. And you interact with it, and it is just glass. And I'm just like absolutely stunned that such a tool exists in the world. And I would absolutely, like, if that could be my job, just fucking making even making levels. Forget about making the game part of it. Just the levels. All the script kiddies having a field day, for sure. Imagine making a tight 4-hour micro game with awesome systems in play, but just gets to the point and is awesome. Sell them on Steam for $10, make stacks. Yeah. Like, I think that there's, like, what I think is so crazy about this is that, like, sky's the limit, right? Like, I don't think you actually need to make a game that is this enormous, huge in-scope sort of thing. That you could really make a game that is very, like, tight and is like a 2-hour experience. Like, that's one of the things that I really thought about Portal, that I thought that the industry was actually going to accept. That I would I'm a fan of the big games. I'm a fan of that kind of, like, that's fine. But what I really want from a gameplay experience is a short, tight, replayable experience. You know? And I think that, like, to kind of introduce something kind of grotesque into the conversation, something like League of Legends actually catches what I think a good game design actually is. And because what happens in a game of League of Legends, you load it up, the characters that are in the game are different every time, so the experience is automatically different no matter what. The game itself lasts about half hour to 40 minutes, so it's a tight, contained sort of thing, and the game has its own kind of story that unfolds as you're playing it. It's not a literal story; it's closer to a sport, but and there is a game on the market that I played that I thought really captured an amazing storytelling element, which is Hades. That Hades came out, and it was a roguelike, and that set the standard of storytelling in roguelikes. Because usually roguelikes are just like, yeah, this is your objective, you go into it, you die, you start again, off you go. But they introduced this concept that every time you died, you returned back to the home base, and that every time you interacted with characters, every time you died, there would be a progression of your relationship with them, and that you could give a resource that you would find in the battlefield to them, and that would progress your relationship. So so the story progressed in that way with every rotation. And so it meant you could sit down and play like a half hour of it, and then still see some kind of story progression. And I thought that was brilliant. I thought that was just like one of the most brilliant executions of storytelling in video games that I think I've ever seen, because it was non-linear, and it was completely baked in to the cycle of the roguelike, and it meant that Hades is a fucking legend. Like, it absolutely is. It set a new standard. It set a new bar, and even their inclusion of music. One of my biggest complaints about most video games is how music interacts in the game world. That most of the time music is just sort of ambient and there, and usually I find it to be kind of offensive is not the right word, but I do find it to be a bit annoying. Like, I'm just like, what is this music? Why is this here? Is this actually helping? Who gives a shit about any of this? Right? It's all just supposed, like you're playing Doom, there's like heavy metal music playing, and you're just supposed to be like, yeah. But I find it to be so it breaks the immersion factor, like if that's what you care about in your game. And Hades did a wonderful job of making music part of the game, but the music came out of the game. That you would enter an area and there would be a character who would sing a song, right? And the song that they made, by the way, is absolutely beautiful. Like, absolutely beautiful. That and I found myself in the midst of the chaos of the game, because it is chaotic. You'd come into this place and there would just be this beautiful, calm serenade, and I found myself more often than not stopping and just spending a little time there. Not only was it beautifully sung, it was beautifully performed, and that's like true artistic work. Like, you think about a game like Skyrim. Skyrim fumbles the ball so hard on this. I think it's probably one of the biggest musical fumbles in maybe the history of video gaming itself. They literally have a bard's college. There's a college where they train bards, right? None of the musicians actually play music in the game world. You're wandering around, and if they do, it's garbage. Like literally like worse than children's nursery rhymes while a guy is plunking on like a 4-string mandolin. Just and the person that they've got singing the song is an actor, not a singer. And so he's just acting through the song. And it's terrible. Genuinely terrible. Yeah, the Bard's College was unfinished. I absolutely. No, there's no two ways about it. That they built the level. They built the level and then they just ran out of time to populate it. Like that's what happened. They built the area. Yeah, Ragnar the Red for the thousands. Like, yeah, exactly. And the amount of music they had was just zero. It was all shit. It was all terrible. And there's a mod that you can download. Of course, the modding community always doing the good work, where you can actually download a whole bunch of music, and then the musicians will play that music, and it improves things instantly. You walk into a pub, and the guy's standing there, and instead of being like, Ragnar the Red with a stupid butthead, right? He actually plays a song that's actually worth listening to. And when you go through the environment, there's this music coming out, and it's amazing how music can really... And Hades really understood that and really captured that. The idea that, like, how enthralling and evocative and gripping. Just walking into an area and there's a song. And suddenly you're just on a different plane of reality. That music does immediately transition your consciousness and takes you away from the mundane nature of your reality and puts you into a sense of transcendence, that you transcend this reality and you interact with it in a way that is ephemeral and on a different frequency. And it's so unbelievable to me that video games don't really take advantage of this more often. That to me, if I were to move forward and actually make something with this toy that they've given us, that is absolutely what I would be trying to do. I would absolutely be trying to create a game world where music was constantly coming in and out of it. And that people, literally, like you're walking around like a forested area and there's like a motley band playing music. Or you're in a castle and there's a guy on the other side of the wall and he's playing some song or something. And music, we know that music can raise your heartbeat, can make you smile and laugh, and can break your heart. We know that it can. And I think when you're in a game world and you stumble upon it, that's the true power of music in a video game. That when you're in a video game, you're usually focused on some kind of endeavor or some kind of quest or some kind of idea. That you have a goal. And then suddenly there's this other artistic thing that happens, and that goal just sort of melts away. And suddenly you find yourself caught up in a whole other reality. And I think there's something genuinely beautiful about this. And that video games, what excites me about it is that video games are really just beginning to understand these things. They're just beginning as an art form to understand that, oh, like this aspect, like music doesn't just need to be an ambient like da 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 da. It doesn't need to be a score. Because right now most video games are like that, where it's a score that's just part of your gameplay experience. And I find that to be so intrusive. That like when you enter an area, there's this like sound effect, like where did that come from? Well, what is happening even? Someone should make a spoof game and it's loaded with that kind of stuff. Where like you walk into a room and a song plays and the guy goes, where did that song come from? Like a fucking Mel Brooks spoof. Mel Brooks was brilliant with that kind of shit. Anyway. This one went off the rails a bit, but I'm fine with that. The internet didn't go down. Call that a resounding success. I hope each and every one of you is having a beautiful time out there, guys. These are tough days. I'm glad that you're here to talk about fucking Rick and Morty and video games and dumb shit while we deal with it all together. Always remember, each and every one of you is a quantum being walking around in quantum energy. These billionaires are spending hundreds of billions of dollars to make sure you never realize it. You just stay the good little commodity they need you to be. Rebel. Revolt. Repent. Good luck. We're going to need it.